Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. This is an important summit today, the Election Integrity Summit. Ohio is going to be ground zero in the elections, and so it's so important that all of you are here today. I'm Mary Smith, CEO of the Task Force for American Democracy, and I want to thank all the people who helped put this together, particularly the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar for hosting it, and Chris Smith and the whole team there for being such amazing partners. We have some very illustrious co-chairs. Former Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor, who is also a member of the task force, former Justice Michael Donnelly, Michael Besser, my friend Bill Weisenberg, and there's an entire host committee, so thanks to all of them. Let's give them a round of applause. I also want to thank Chris Ronayne, the Cuyahoga County Executive, who will be speaking later. And finally, we didn't do this alone. There's a lot of community partners, the Ohio Democracy Project, Democracy Rising Collaborative, Ohioans for the Rule of Law, All Voting is Local, Cleveland Votes, and Common Cause Ohio. So thanks to all of them. I started the Task Force for American Democracy as I was beginning my term as president of the American Bar Association. I thought it was important not just to work not only on the most important legal issues of our time, but the most important issue of our time, threats to democracy. And this was 3 years ago. Since then, unfortunately, the threats have not diminished. And in fact, they have escalated. And in determining who should lead the task force, I turned to two esteemed lawyers, Secretary Jay Johnson and Judge Michael Luttig. I could not think of two more qualified or better people to lead this effort. I am thrilled that Judge Luttig is with us here today. You'll hear from him later. Judge Luttig has been one of the most eloquent and trusted voices on educating all of us on the rule of law, the intent of our founding fathers, and the obligations of all of us as citizens. He travels the country day in and day out to talk to people in their communities, in their schools, and in their workplaces. He is the quintessential example of a servant leader and true patriot. We are so lucky that he has heeded this call when the country needs him the most, and he has chosen to do this. Because, of course, he doesn't have to do this, but he has chosen it. But rather, and I need to correct myself, I think our country has chosen him. One of his most significant traits is that he is not afraid to speak truth to power, a trait that seems to be exceedingly rare these days. And on a personal note, one of the true highlights of throwing my heart and soul into this work of tending to our democracy is that I have the honor and privilege of doing it in the shadow of Judge Luttig every single day. Aside from his formidable legal knowledge, he is simply an amazing human being who lives every single hour of every single day with honesty, integrity, compassion, and empathy. He certainly has made me a better person. During the past few years, the task force has been motivating lawyers to stand up for the rule of law, the independence of the judiciary, freedom of speech, and of course, the reason we are all here today, free and fair elections. In 2024, during the last election cycle, we hosted sessions in battleground states such as Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. That is why we are all here today. We will hear from election officials and experts, people in the media about reporting about elections, and have a chance to do an interactive session later today. This day, I just want to emphasize though, is not a one and done. We hope that it is a call to action to all of you to continue this work here, right here in Ohio, up to the election, during the election, and I dare to say the most important time is after the election. As we approach the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, I'm reminded of what has been called the greatest sentence ever written. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This sentence, drafted by Thomas Jefferson and refined by Benjamin Franklin and John Adams, appears in the Declaration of Independence. It is widely regarded as one of the most powerful and influential sentences in all of history. It encapsulates the philosophical foundation of the United States, asserting equality, inherent human rights, and the pursuit of personal freedom, and has inspired generations worldwide. I hope it inspires you as well. I am reminded we're celebrating the 250th anniversary this year, but I think back to 1976 when we were celebrating the 200th anniversary. And President Ford was president then. He had become president because the former president had resigned, and he was actually running for office during that time, during July 1976. But he gave a speech that day. He didn't mention his election. He didn't mention himself. And, let's all be honest, President Ford wasn't known to be a great orator. But on that day, he rose to the occasion in front of Philadelphia's Independence Hall. And this is what he said. He said, "It is fitting that we ask ourselves hard questions, even on a glorious day like today. Are the institutions under which we live working the way they should? Are the foundations laid in 1776 and 1789 still strong enough and sound enough to resist the tremors of our times? And are our God-given rights secure? Are hard-won liberties protected?" It's almost as if he was saying that today. So I will leave you with a quote before we start the program, with a quote from Frederick Douglass. And he said, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will." So I hope you use today as a call to action, and thank you all for being here today. And I would like to introduce Chris Schmidt from the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary, and good afternoon, everyone. We're so thankful for the Task Force for American Democracy for your partnership on this event. To everyone here in person and joining us via live stream across the country, welcome to the Cleveland Metro Bar and this incredibly important conversation. Over the last 2 years, our organization has been at the forefront of a national conversation around the rule of law and the importance of protecting and preserving institutions and individuals who guard it against any political zeitgeist and the individuals who drive it forward. Perhaps no institution is quite as central to that effort as our democratic elections that happen 2 or 3 or 4 times every year across big cities and small towns throughout the country. When we talk about the rule of law, we're talking about a system of rules and protections that exist in the best interest of everyone. We the people means we the people. Not just those with the most money or those with the tallest soapbox, but also for the tired masses yearning to be free that join our nation as citizens. And for people that have paid their debt to society and are re-entering our electorate as second chance voters. And for people like my grandparents who didn't finish high school and went to vote in the church basement twice a year in their overalls covered in who knows what after finishing the farm chores. As promised in every invitation to this event, this is a decidedly nonpartisan topic. It's my sincere hope that we can all return to a time where free and fair elections is a universal goal and not a political talking point. Just like some on the left have a good point about systematic barriers that prevent eligible voters from registering and voting, and that those barriers should be torn down, some on the right have a good point that we should be absolutely confident in the veracity of our elections and make counting and reporting as efficient and transparent as possible. Both sides lose if we don't address all of those issues in a way that works for America. That's not even to count the 70+% of people under 40 years old who don't identify with either political party. That's something, if I want you to take one thing away from today, we're fortunate to have a lot of students back here in the room. This whole one side or the other side is not something they identify with. They identify with a better way. And I think that that's truly a promise that we can look forward to as I get older, and when we're celebrating the 300th anniversary of this nation, we're having a very different conversation altogether. Calling this an election integrity event was strategic because conceptually, election integrity is hard to argue with. Everyone who's eligible to vote should have the chance to vote. And every vote that's cast by an eligible voter should count. But we all know that the devil's in the margins there. Who is everyone? And what does count mean? That's what we're here to talk about today. In the lead up to this event, it's amazing how many times I had to have a conversation with potential speakers and potential attendees that the words election integrity weren't shorthand for voter suppression or something nefarious. In some ways, that shows the complexity of this entire topic and what we're here to talk about today. Even when we use words that have very clear meanings, those words have taken on different meanings. And we have to fight against those underlying messages and meanings as much as we have to fight against the problems that underlie them. Our founders were wrestling with the very topic of who counts 250 years ago this week in Philadelphia. In their minds, everyone should certainly represent white male landowners. And in 1789, that represented about 6% of America. In the 237 years since, we've been expanding the meaning of everyone, slowly but surely. But today there are conscious and purposeful efforts by some who would restrict who counts to where past lines were drawn. When asked by socialite Elizabeth Powell in 1787 what kind of government the Constitutional Convention had established for America, Ben Franklin famously quipped, "A republic, if you can keep it." That responsibility of keeping our republic is exactly why we're here today. Throughout this event, you're going to hear from organizations featured on the front of your program that are doing great, awesome, important, accessible work in Northeast Ohio and beyond. Through some commercials that will happen between sessions, my hope is that everyone here can leave this event with new ideas of how they can personally help preserve and protect our democracy this fall and beyond. That's my assignment for everyone here. Find your lane today, and over the next 135 days in particular, help us row. A quick review of our agenda. Following the keynote, we'll take a break, and there's going to be lots of snacks and drinks out in the hallway for you to keep energized throughout the day, including full sugar Coke. What a day to have full sugar Coke. Following our two panels here in the auditorium, which will really be excellent, you can see the speakers listed in your agenda. We'll recess upstairs to the Erie Room for breakout discussions with your peers who have joined us today. We'll do a wrap-up in there with Justice Michael Donnelly, and then we'll have a complimentary reception that will open at 5 or maybe even a few minutes before. If you need anything throughout the day, look for one of my teammates back in the back or throughout the auditorium that have a blue and white name tag, and they'll be glad to help you with whatever we can do to assist. Before I leave you, I want to offer a few words of thanks. Thank you to the host committee for putting together today and for the audience that we have online. We sincerely appreciate your help in making this happen. Thank you in advance to our speakers and our panelists. Thank you to my team who this week put this together over the last 4 months, but most importantly, last week when all the logistics were happening, I was out of the office and they did a fantastic job of letting me show up this morning to something that was ready to go. Thanks to also, I mentioned them before, can I have all of our students in the back raise their hands? These are students from our from our high school, college, and law school programs, and it's just awesome that they're here today. They got to have lunch a little while ago with Judge Luttig and Mary Smith and Chief Justice O'Connor, and I think they've already gotten to see where we're headed for today, and hopefully they'll continue to be inspired and engaged throughout this event. One additional thing I want to put on your agenda before I leave the stage, and that's in celebration of America 250 and in support of the independent judiciary, there's a bus tour that will be headed around the Midwest with former judges starting in Pittsburgh and headed to Columbus and then to Cleveland and then to Detroit on the week after the 4th. We'd be thrilled if you joined us for the Cleveland event. Please put Thursday, July 9th at 8:45 a.m. Again, Thursday, July 9th at 8:45 a.m. in your calendar. We'll be holding a press conference and a rally in support of the judiciary on the steps of the Stokes Federal Building over at Huron and West 9th Street. Please join us out there to help us fill up the plaza. All of our students will be joining us. I hope many of you in the room will join us as well for that very important celebration of democracy. And with that, let's officially get started. Let me start over. We are truly fortunate here in Cuyahoga County to have a leader of our county government who walks the walk. Over his 3 decades in public service, as you'll see in his bio, Chris Ronayne has done it all. Some of his projects are very visible, like the continued reimagination of the lakefront, the creation of the Euclid Corridor, and the world-class amenities of University Circle. But other efforts are more intangible. I truly do believe that the collegiality and positive energy for both our county government and our city government can be traced straight back to Chris and the quality of the person he is and to the people he surrounds himself with. Chris is the 3rd Cuyahoga County executive and took office in 2023 with a vision for a healthier Cuyahoga County, for safe communities, good jobs, a fair justice system, and excellent services. He is unopposed for election this fall. For a few words of welcome, ladies and gentlemen, a true champion of our region, my friend, Cuyahoga County Executive Chris Ronayne.
Thank you, Chris. Good afternoon, everybody. Chris just mentioned I'm unopposed. It is absolutely because nobody else wanted the job. So glad, I guess, to be in that position, I think. But I am really, really glad to be here today with you and to welcome you. I think I'm welcoming people in my own backyard back to Cuyahoga County and to this summit. But I also want to say to those that are visiting virtually with us, thank you for being a part of this summit today. I have a fun job. It is a fun job, so maybe somebody else wants it someday. But today I've had in the last hour and a half the opportunity to welcome a group of scientists over the convention center, particularly biologists studying the natural world together here, a group of career college experts helping with workforce training throughout the United States, but they're here today. And together, those two groups represent 1,000 people in our city today, and the convention center is full. And then I told them I'm coming to see my esteemed colleagues in the legal profession over here at One Cleveland Center, and it's been a threefer, and it's a nice trifecta to be with scientists, with educators, and with lawyers. On the way in, I said to my friends, Judge Saffold, Judge Conley, and Cindy Dempsey, that as time goes by in my position, a non-lawyer, I appreciate lawyers more and more every year. And that's not a quip, it's actually a reality. I do. For the things you do in the courtrooms, with us in our business affairs, but also with these kinds of summits. I want to say both to American Bar Association, Mary, thank you for your work, and Chris, for you and your colleagues' work here at the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association. You matter. You matter more than ever. I'll have a few reasons to reflect on that, but the first, I want to just kind of take that same page out of Chris's citation of Elizabeth Powell's great question to Benjamin Franklin when she says, well, doctor, what do we have? Do we have a republic or a monarchy? And he said just what Chris said, which is a republic if you can keep it. Who knew that at the 250th turn of our anniversary in this country, we are today living that moment of reckoning? We are at a moment of reckoning of where are we on this question? And so this summit today, to me, means everything as you broadcast out to the country what our whole story's about, what our ideals are for an American democracy. And I have to say thank you to Justices O'Connor and Donnelly for your work off the bench, for what you've done for democracy. You're going to hear from them more today, but the work they've done post their careers in the state Supreme Court is just is something we salute you on. Looking at Maureen, I asked her on the way in, do you think we can ever get back, sorry, Justice O'Connor, can we ever get back to fair districting on our Ohio ballot again? And we talked that through a little bit about how to get there. Because I think when we talk about matters of election integrity, I'm going to talk a minute on my scripted notes about our Board of Elections. Your Board of Elections aren't your problem. Your problem is gerrymandering. When it comes to election integrity, your problem are things like gerrymandering and fear-mongering. Students, take note, you can change this. And I hate that we put the world's problems on your shoulders in the next generation, but we're rooting for you. And I have to say to CMBA, you've made a difference in my student's life. I've got 2 high school students, one who just graduated. She came to a CMBA event in this room and was inspired, and then was introduced to a forum you did at the City Club and about the rule of law. And Audrey Ronayne asked a question at the City Club, and now Audrey Ronayne is heading next month to the University of Wisconsin and wants to become a lawyer. So thank you, CMBA, for what you do. Students, can we give our friends a round of applause for what they do, students? Can you give them? Thank you. And back at you, students. Thank you for being here and for caring about American democracy and where we go. So again, good afternoon, and it is my pleasure to be with you on this important topic. I probably said all I need to say about election integrity is it's really what happens outside of the boards of elections, because there's been attacks on the election integrity inside the boards of elections. I'm proud that a few of you were with us last week. We stood up for democracy when we stood up for the Ohio Organizing Collaborative, which endured a lot a few weeks back, right? And endured a lot when they were met with 100 FBI officials around the state of Ohio without necessarily any kind of paperwork on why they were there, without much direction on why they were knocking on doors, without warrants and taking things like personal devices, computers, phones. That's fear-mongering at its best, and we'll see where that goes. We'll see what they find. But the reality of the facts are, most often, the integrity issue actually rests with us. It's not people up to no good when it comes to elections. So we stood at the Board of Elections, and I'm proud that we just built a new Board of Elections, built out in the former, bit of irony here, in the former Plain Dealer building, which was our major news source for students and those who didn't know it. But in that elections center, we did build a new center for the reasons of access, to be in a place where people could get to us by transit, could get ample parking when they got here, could be in a place where they didn't have to stand in the rain and the snow in November when they're voting and have any deterrent to leave and not vote. So we're proud that we brought that Board of Elections to bear at 1801 Superior, and it's a new anchor in our community. But what happens there is simply the support of free, fair, secure, and transparent elections. Before I ran for office 4 years ago, and yes, I'm hoping to seek a second term as your county executive because our work's not done, but I made sure to become an election rover the year before my election because I wanted to see how it worked. And what I found out was an efficient, well-organized entity that works in our communities to make sure that our elections are fair, free, and secure. And so learning as a rover, monitoring places of polling places, seeing how ballot boxes are secure, seeing how our computer technology is advanced and secure, I felt ever confident moving into this job that I would have a good working relationship with our Board of Elections. But I saw it firsthand, and I would urge you guys to volunteer. Students, and I'm sure many of our adult legal professionals have done this in their off time, work our polls, work a day. I'm working toward, I'm going to spoil it, spoiler alert here, I'm working toward making Cuyahoga County, if I can get my county council to agree to it, at least a half a day of vacation day to make it never a barrier to get to the polling places, right, and to get your ballot cast. I see a clap there. I'll take it because we got to go there. But sometimes governments have to lead by example to lead the private sector into the same space. Speaking of the private sector, I've mentioned a lot of judges. I do want to say to attorneys in the private sector, I mentioned how much I appreciate and lean on you more and more these days. I do think that the institution of our legal institutions is an anchor in Cleveland, Ohio, that doesn't get enough press. And no disrespect to those who do, but our health sciences institutions do. Our wonderful world-class hospitals do. Our sports teams do. Our arts and culture do. They're all what sort of represent this county in terms of the best of the best. But I actually think that the legal community, that our law firms historically represent the best of the best in terms of that anchor employment profession of law here in town. So I just needed to get that out and say thank you. So back to the notes, I do want to say that it has been disconcerting of late to hear all the misinformation and disinformation that seems to correlate to the advanced digital world when anybody can state what they claim to be a fact at any time without even a fact check and without anybody actually looking into what they're saying. And fear, and giving people fear, particularly our newcomers, particularly those that have come to us from other places. There's a lot of fear mongering going on. But on the trail, I had a unique chance to hear firsthand people's opinions and their fears and what's shaping their thoughts on the American democracy, what they're reading, what they're hearing, and what they're seeing on TV. Well, we know we live in a time where information moves faster than ever before, and that can be a blessing and a curse, that false and misleading information can spread widely before accurate information reaches voters. And as you know, correcting those rumors and bad information can present a monumental challenge. I think the great intermediary, the great mitigator is yet in front of us, but we haven't discovered what it is yet, to actually perhaps use AI to our advantage to get the facts out to the American public and beyond. Public trust depends on transparency, providing timely factual information about election processes and procedures that help voters make informed decisions and encourages trust in the system. As I was speaking with Justice O'Connor on the way in, I was thinking about a certain ballot initiative, call it Issue 1, back when, that had to do with fair districting. And on top of the naysaying on a process that should just be simple, that a computer could do the districting and do it much more fair than we have it today. You all know that. Fairer than the gerrymandering hands of those who hold the pen. But to make matters worse on that particular issue, the ballot language was a page and a half, meant line by line to confuse, right? To confuse every step of the way and to actually leave voters with the, what do I vote? What the heck am I voting on? So keeping it also simple, our messaging, when it comes to putting forth our ballot initiatives, that's what will enhance public trust and transparency. Misinformation and disinformation can and does undermine public confidence in the electoral process and in our democracy. Our goal is to combat and dispel false claims with facts. We see them every day in our line of work at county government, but you see it out there. We know that voter fraud is extremely rare. It is important to take note of any moment we see voter fraud. You see something, you say something. But both in Ohio and in the United States, the reason I stand here today to say it is rare is not to excuse it, but to actually be the counterbalance to the misinformation that says it is everywhere, that it is pervasive. That is just simply not the facts. In the 2020 presidential election, nearly 6 million votes were cast in Ohio, with 27 votes that were questioned as being illegal, 27 of 6 million. Now, every one of those 27 needed to be investigated. But the facts of the matter is, it is not as disproportionately said to be out of hand. And I say that because that's the narrative that's out there, that everything's a fraud, which then licenses perhaps an agency such as the FBI to find its way across our state at the behest of the Justice Department, to go into people's offices and their personal space to take their personal things, and then just fearmonger from there. So we do let you know what the percentage actually is. And that percentage of fraud in Ohio in that presidential election was 0.0005 of the total vote. Again, it is communicated to you as half of it is fraud, right? Not so, not so. So voter education is one of the most effective tools we can use for combating misinformation. Encouraging residents to rely on official election sources can not only reduce confusion, but it can also increase participation. Once again, to you students, thank you. You are the future. You're 100% of our future. We have a program called Your Voice, Your Vote through Tri-C. And we work with high school students to let their fellow students know as they turn 18, get registered. You can be sure that my daughter, with her 18-year-old birthday gifts, got it wrapped, and I'm not kidding about this, I tagged on a voter registration card right on the box, right? Shame on me for not knowing that her high school the next month would actually send graduating students home with a voter registration card. I hope every high school in the 34 districts of Cuyahoga County takes note and does that. You can be a difference and you can be a change maker. But students, speaking amongst yourself generationally, you're the most trusted generation and messenger in your generation, right? So speak to your colleagues about the importance of voting. I know you will. I know those in the seats here today do, but it's about getting to the rest of you that it's their future. In Cuyahoga County, we do have a strong track record, as I said, of conducting safe, secure, and transparent elections. That's why we stood at the Board of Elections with many public officials last week to let them know that our Board of Elections works year-round to ensure those very processes are fair, secure, and transparent, and they're conducted in accordance with Ohio law. I think Tony Perlatti is going to be here later today with the Board of Elections to talk about the mechanics of how that works. But I took the time as a county executive last week to spend part of my Monday afternoon with him going over the mechanics of the next election, the November election, and making sure everything is secure, and also coming up with a game plan to make sure that we're working in our communities at polling places to make sure there's no confusion. So our election staff has worked tirelessly to build that public trust and ensure every eligible voter can cast a ballot and have it counted, and in fact should. I have full confidence in the integrity of our local election system, and you should too. It's a strange part of my job lately to be going around talking about the fact that our Board of Elections is secure and that it is transparent and that it is fair. It's a strange place to be. It's essentially a counter reaction to this thrust upon us that everything is corrupted and fraud. It's just false misinformation, right? So we come to speak the truth with you today that our elections processes are fair and are secure. So there's multiple layers of security, from voter registration to vote by mail to secure equipment polling locations and ballot counting. Ensuring the integrity and the security of the voter registration process is paramount to maintaining a robust democratic system. That's my job, working with the Board of Elections to mechanically make sure it's secure and fair. It's probably not the sexiest side of it. It's probably not the most exciting thing you're going to hear today, but I do need to say this to you because it is my job, that we have a secure system at the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections. You're going to hear from others about the importance of making sure we're fully engaging in democracy and that what that means is your vote. So thank you very much, every voter. You deserve to participate in our democracy without fear and confusion, and all Ohioans deserve answers, transparency, and fairness. Thank you for what you're doing today with this summit. Keep on going. Let's see our next 250 years be an unflappable democracy in America. Thanks again.
Thank you, Chris, and I'm excited to hear that Audrey's going to be a lawyer because she will be a fantastic one. I know. She interned for us last summer, and the whole time we talked about law school, and I'm so happy she's made that choice. So it's a challenge to the county and to anybody else gathered here today. Our office is closed on Election Day in the spring and the fall, so where people can vote, and they can volunteer, and they can work for on a campaign or whatever it is. So a great way for us to change our electoral system is for more places to give people the option to do that. So please do. Our next speaker, over the past year, it's been truly a great pleasure to work with her on the matters of law and justice throughout the state of Ohio. Former Ohio Supreme Court Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor's resume makes it clear that she's one of the most accomplished and durable public servants in the state of Ohio. In addition to her 12 years leading the court, she spent 8 years as an associate justice following a successful term as lieutenant governor under Bob Taft. But her story really starts in the trenches of justice, serving as a magistrate and as a common pleas judge, as a county prosecutor down in Summit County. Despite officially retiring in 2022, she somehow is busier than she used to be, helping improve our state and protecting the third branch of government. It's been my honor to work with Chief Justice O'Connor and Justice Donnelly and several others in this room to create Ohioans for the Rule of Law that brought lawyers and judges together to stand up for the courts and the fundamental concept of an independent judiciary. Ladies and gentlemen, a leading light for fairness in Ohio elections and a committed public servant, former Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you here. I can't believe we're here. I can't believe in 2026 we're talking about what we're talking about. We're talking about integrity of our elections. We're talking about making sure that all votes count. We're talking about making sure that those that want to vote can vote. And we're talking about the opposition and how they are selectively determining who will vote and how they will vote, and stirring up questions, stirring up issues, stirring up problems that I thought were long settled in this country over the last 250 years. But apparently they're not. Apparently they're not. So here we are. We find ourselves in this summit, which is a great thing to do in response. But you know what? I hate to be reactive. I hate to have to react to something like the onslaught that we are experiencing in this country on a fundamental right, and that is the right to vote, no matter who you are. If you are of age and you are a citizen, you have the right to register to vote. It was very interesting that Executive Ronayne said out of 6 million votes counted, 27 were questionable. 27 votes. Okay, so this brings me to one point that I'd like to make. You know who Frank LaRose is, I'm presuming, Secretary of State. Every time he opens his mouth, he talks about what a great job the Secretary of State is doing with regards to voting in the state of Ohio, how our elections are so secure, they're so smoothly run. We are just an example for the rest of the country, according to Secretary of State LaRose. And yet, he and his friends, especially his friends, are challenging the integrity here in the state of Ohio. The big hoopla, So what's the truth, Frank? Are we at risk because of the faulty administration of the Secretary of State's office and thereby the boards of elections? Or are we one of the examples for the rest of the country on how elections should be run and how integrity of elections is guarded and made sure? I believe it's the latter, and I don't understand why anybody would want to challenge the way we do elections here in Ohio, because, as I said, they are a standard that other states can look to and say, I want to be like Ohio. I want to have a record like Ohio. So I think that we should be proud of the way our elections are administered here. And you know what? Everything you hear that is fear-mongering and telling you how unsafe, et cetera, at risk, et cetera, is false information. It seems to me that that's what we have so much of. There's a saying that a lie can make it halfway around the world before truth even gets their shoes on. And that's because people tend to gravitate towards the salacious and the lie that's being told. And it piques their curiosity, and then they repeat it, and et cetera. And that's the problem with a lie. And that is what we are seeing. So remember that. A lie gets halfway around the world before the truth even puts their shoes on. Because sometimes the truth is dull. And sometimes telling the truth is not exciting, and it doesn't engage the way a lie does. So that's probably why when any article is written by AI, you're going to see a disclaimer at the bottom, because this might have some information in it that's not true. And that's exactly what we're facing right now. Now, talk about facing. I want to talk briefly about a report that came out from the Brennan Center. Do you all know what the Brennan Center is? Yes, students, Brennan Center. Okay, one of the most important organizations, or entities, I should say, in existence, and something that you should really pay attention to. The Brennan Center for Justice at NYU School of Law. They are champions for voting rights, among other things. But they have written, their staff, and they're responsible for just so many articles that are so well done and so well researched on so many different topics. So put the Brennan Center in your, your list of resources when you are trying to figure out things. If you got any kind of information that you need to check with the Brennan Center. So there's a report that was put out by the Brennan Center in August of last year, and it argues that a significant new threat to American elections has emerged. And again, not from foreign actors, not from hackers or local election failures, but from actions taken by the federal government itself. I'm going to stop and say that there's a book that I would commend to you, and it's called How Democracies Die. And the author is a gentleman named Mr. Luttig. And he chronicles the failures of democracies in several countries. And it's always the same. The law is used, elections are used, political parties are used, and soon it becomes an authoritarian government because of the fraud that is being perpetrated, the selection of who gets to vote. There's elections, but who gets to vote? And the messaging. And then it becomes a authoritarian government that is supported by the military, supported by the police, supported by entities that are there to enforce the laws and the positions of the authoritarian government. We've seen it so often, and unfortunately, it's still taking place. Are we at threat for something like that? I certainly hope not. But we are under attack. Another thing that I would recommend to you is How the Courts Failed Germany. I talked about it to the group of students. It was a presentation made in 2010 here in Ohio, and it was also a presentation. I've heard it twice. It was at the Maltz Museum, and then I also heard it when the gentleman, the author, who was from the Holocaust Museum, a historian, put it on for the judges, the entire, judges of the state at one of our conferences. And it's How the Courts Failed Germany. And you can get it on YouTube. It's about an hour long, maybe, and it's chilling to listen to the gentleman talk. Meineke is his name, Professor Meineke, talk about how Hitler legally took over the government in Germany, and he did it with elections. He did it with coalition building, and people had no idea what they were putting in office, and it was the Nazi Party. And we know what happened, obviously, after Hitler and his cronies, came to power in Germany. So again, the failures in the countries that have lost their democracy are done quasi-legally, and they're done through people in power who use the law in a way that serves their purposes, and it's upheld by the judiciary, which is a very unfortunate thing. Now, as I said, according to the reports that the Brennan Center put out, elections in 2020, 22, and 24 were conducted successfully, despite extraordinary challenges. Election officials across the country worked together under intense pressure, and the overall system functioned as it was intended. That's not just here in the state of Ohio. That's across the country. The authors, however, contend that the developments in 2025 signal a shift in which the federal executive power is being used in ways that could alter the balance of election administration and weaken democratic safeguards. The report identifies 4 major areas of concern. First, it attempts to rewrite election rules and interfere with election administration. This is coming from the executive office. Second, efforts to target election officials, civic organizations, and others involved in protecting elections. When I say targeting, they mean taking legal action. The executive branch, one of the departments or agencies of the federal government threatening legal action. Third, support for individuals who have challenged or undermined election processes. And fourth, a retreat from the federal government's traditional role in protecting voting rights and election security. And that is probably one that I see is so self-evident at what we're experiencing now. The government, the Department of Justice, the federal government is there to protect voting rights. And now we're seeing measures for voting suppression. The report begins with an executive order that was issued in March of 2025. According to the authors, this order seeks to reshape several aspects of election administration. One provision would require individuals using the federal voter registration form to provide documentary proof of citizenship, such as a passport or your naturalization papers. Supporters view this as a way to ensure that only citizens vote. Okay, the people that are examining this say millions of eligible Americans lack immediate access to these documents and could face barriers to registration to vote. That's voter suppression. Another provision addresses voting equipment. This is the one that it's nuts. The executive order directs changes to federal voting system certification standards and could require states to replace or recertify the voting machines that are used. Critics argue that this could be costly. Of course it could be costly, millions upon millions upon millions of dollars. And that money doesn't exist. And could fuel public distrust in the election technology, what is being used. In order to seek greater federal access to voter registration databases and voter maintenance records, the administration put out an order. I think at this point there might be maybe 11 states that have complied and turned over their voting records. Ohio is one of them. Our Secretary of State turned over 8 million voter registration records to the federal government. I say in the dead of night. There was no notice. There was no ability for any group or any individual to immediately go to court and try and get an injunction against doing that. It was announced after the fact, after it was done. The horse is out of the barn with the election records for here in Ohio. How they're going to be used or misused by politically motivated actors, I have no idea. The author argues that these measures exceed presidential authority because election administration is primarily governed by Congress and the states rather than the executive branch. The second major concern involves what the report describes as targeting of election officials, nonprofit organizations. We heard about the Ohio operating coalition and how that was raided for no apparent purpose. That was a threat. That was a message being sent. And other institutions involved in elections. You know, the organizing collaborate was so successful in registering people to vote in the last general election, and to people who oppose democracy, people who want voter suppression. They're scary people. The organizing collaborative, they're scary people because they get people registered, and we don't want the people that they register to vote because guess what? They're not going to vote for us. And that's the whole mindset. So, it really is frightening. It is frightening. The second major concern involves what the report describes, as I said, targeting elected officials and these organizations. It points to new Justice Department task forces focused on election integrity and voter fraud. What a waste of the taxpayer money. Let's have this giant, department or agency, and they're going to investigate voter fraud. It's non-existent, practically non-existent. While supporters say these initiatives are intended to protect elections, the authors argue that they are based on claims of widespread fraud that have never, ever been substantiated by evidence. Report highlights statements by administration officials suggesting investigations into election administrators, advocacy organizations, journalists even, and others who defended the legitimacy of prior elections, particularly the 2020 election. It argues that even the threat of investigation can have serious consequences. Election officials already face harassment, threats, and high levels of stress. Additional legal pressure could encourage experienced officials to leave their position, and that will reduce the expertise and the institutional knowledge within the administration of elections. We do not want that. These people are dedicated public servants, and we want their knowledge, we want their dedication, and we want to protect them, and that is extremely important. Similarly, nonprofit organizations involved in voter registration and voter education may scale back their activities because of fear of legal scrutiny and, of course, the retaliation. Now, I don't think that the Ohio collaborating or organizing collaborative is going to scale back. If anything, I think it has motivated people to support them more and to energize them more that, no, you're not doing this to us. You're not doing this in Ohio, you know, you big thug. Anyway, I haven't named names. Similarly, nonprofit organizations, okay. Related concerns involves actions directed at law firms. We all know about the law firms. They're representing clients. Those clients are looked on unfavorably, and so the law firms are then there's retaliation against the law firms. And the court, you know, obviously when the law firms were involved in election litigation or investigations connected to January 6 or election-related disputes, courts have blocked several of these actions, finding constitutional concerns. According to the report, such measures may discourage legal representation in politically sensitive election cases. We cannot, the administration cannot silence lawyers. They cannot choose clients for lawyers. They cannot make it so a client who needs a lawyer can't get a lawyer because the lawyers are afraid of retaliation for representation. Now, I know lawyers, you know, that would not think twice about representing someone under those circumstances, and I think the vast majority of lawyers feel that way. Yet there are some major law firms that have taken, I think, the less than courageous approach. But enough said about that. The third area involves support for individuals who challenge election outcomes. The report focuses particularly on a decision to pardon approximately 1,500 individuals connected to the January 6, 2021 attack at the United States Capitol. 1,500 individuals pardoned. Some of them pled guilty, okay? And yet they're getting pardoned even after they admitted that they broke the law. Critics argue that these pardons send a message that attempts to interfere with election certification and may not carry lasting consequences. In other words, go to your local election board and, you know, raise hell and you know, do all kinds of things to disrupt the election. There may be a pardon in it for you if you get convicted of something. That's just something that we can't have. The report suggests that such action could embolden future efforts to challenge or disrupt election results, again, through political pressure and intimidation. It discusses the case of a woman named Tina Peters, a former Colorado election official. She was convicted under state law. Now, you know, students, the difference. If you're convicted under state law, you cannot get a federal pardon. You can get pardoned by the governor. You could have your sentence commuted, but the feds can't do anything about it. So a former Colorado election official was convicted under state law for providing unauthorized access to voting equipment. The author argues that federal support for her appeals could encourage future misconduct by election officials who seek to advance election conspiracy theories. This woman let someone in to the voting machines, okay, and that person was there not to fix them. Trust me. And so she was convicted. Okay, state and the state sent her to the pokey. I don't know for how long. I think maybe 6 years. And so she obviously reached out and said, and people on her behalf, gee whiz, the January 6th people got pardoned. Why can't she? I think she's still in there. Finally, the report examines what it calls a retreat from federal election protection. The major focus is the reduction of resources devoted to election security within the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. I'm sure that you have never heard about this. That's known as CISA. For years, CISA worked with state and local officials to strengthen cybersecurity and protect election infrastructure from foreign and domestic threats. They are the super duper tech people that put together all the stuff that I don't know there's anybody in this room understands. I sure don't. According to the report, staffing reductions, funding cuts, and the suspension of some election security activities have weakened these efforts. The authors argue that this leaves election systems more vulnerable to cyber attacks and other forms of interference. I would argue that it opens us up on many levels to interference and cyber attacks and vulnerability. The report also examines changes within the Justice Department. Within the Justice Department, there was a Department of their Civil Rights Division. Historically, the department played a major role in enforcing voting rights laws and protecting access to the ballot. The authors argue that under current leadership, the department has shifted its focus away from voting rights enforcement and towards investigations concerning voter fraud and voter roll maintenance. And voter roll maintenance, was part of what I spoke about earlier, why 8 million of our voter records were given over to the administration. The critics worry that this shift could reduce federal protections against voter discrimination while increasing pressure for aggressive voter roll purges that may mistakenly remove eligible voters. The rolls are purged every so often. What the criterion is, it's supposed to be non-participation. I think you don't purge anybody from the voter rolls unless you see a death certificate. That is the only reason, or a volunteer, a letter, please take me off, I'm moving to Colorado or wherever. But just because you haven't voted is no reason to take away a person's ability to show up the next cycle or the next election. That's foolishness. Okay, the report, one central argument appears repeatedly that the Constitution divides election authority among states. Congress, courts, and independent institutions, they contend that attempts by the executive branch to expand its role in election administration and upset the balance and create risk for a democratic governance cannot stand. At the same time, it emphasizes that checks and balances remain in place. And I would love to see checks and balances in place. That means I would love to see Congress get up from its supine position and do something that they're being paid to do. And that is to represent their districts and do the work of the Congress in the federal government. It's not happening. It emphasizes that checks and balances, like I said, remain in place. The courts have blocked portions of executive orders, actions, and state election officials continue to administer elections. Independent agencies still operate under statutory requirement, and civil society organizations continue to monitor election integrity and voting rights. My question is, for how much longer will they be able to do that? So in conclusion, the report presents a warning about what its authors view as unprecedented efforts by the federal government to reshape election administration. It argues that actions involving election rules, investigations, pardons, voting rights enforcement, and election security collectively threaten the independence and the integrity of American elections. Now, whether you agree or not with all of the conclusions of this report, and I really would ask you to go to the Brennan Center website and read the entire thing. I think it's about 30 pages. Questions about the proper role of federal power in elections, the balance between election security and voting access, and the institutions responsible for safeguarding democratic processes. These are important questions. Again, whether you take it all in, whether you take some of it in, whatever. Even if 3 of these things happen, it's devastating to our democracy. As the nation approaches the future elections, these debates will likely remain the center of the American political life, and they shouldn't be. We shouldn't be talking about election security. The only way we should talk about election security is to brag on how good it is, and how well our elections are administered, and how easy it is to vote. And instead, we have roadblocks. Roadblocks here in Ohio. There's a bill sitting on the governor's desk right now. I'm not sure whether he's going to sign it or not. And that would create a barrier for people that want to do mail-in ballots, and make it more difficult for them to do that. That certainly is a obstacle for a lot of people. You've got to go get a copy of whatever, your birth certificate, your naturalization papers, your passport. You know how many people don't have a passport? And how many people have no access to the ability to have those things copied and then put in the mail? Think about the information you're sharing at that point with whomever gets to look at those documents. The government has no right to all that information about you. And so I think it will be challenged in court, and we'll see what happens if the governor signs it. If the governor doesn't sign it or vetoes it, which I would hope that Governor DeWine, as he is stepping out of office, would stand up for democracy and veto it. But the question becomes, there's a supermajority in the legislature. Will they have the votes to override the veto? So that's the next drama. If, again, the governor has the intestinal fortitude to not sign that piece of legislation. So with that, I'm so happy that we have so many young people here, and I look forward to seeing you on the Stokes Building on July 9th as we come through Cleveland on our bus tour. I'm looking forward to the bus tour. Justice Donnelly and I are going Western Pennsylvania, a couple places, over to Columbus. Then we're going to stop on the way up from Columbus to Cleveland. We're going to overnight, and then we're going to have activities on the 9th here in Cleveland. I want you all to participate, please. We're going to have media there. We're going to have, your ability to interact and ask questions. It's going to be good. And especially the young citizens here, please show up. We welcome you with open arms. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you so much, Chief Justice O'Connor. That was amazing. We really appreciate it. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Judge J. Michael Luttig. As I mentioned, he's co-chair of the task force, one of the leading voices on the rule of law today, someone who commands such gravitas, and it's particularly fitting. Justice O'Connor and Justice Donnelly are going on the bus tour, and one of the ways that autocracy has been fought, for example, in Poland, is the judges leave the courtroom and go out into the communities. And that is what Judge Luttig does every single day. And so we're so thrilled to have him here today. Without further ado, Judge Luttig.
Well, thank you for those kind words, Mary. But you really just had one thing not to do, and that was to graciously thank all of our friends and who are here today for their efforts in bringing this summit to Cleveland. I specifically asked you not to do that. That's what I wanted to do. But you know, the best laid plans of mice and men, as they say. But that's why I didn't give you the text of my remarks in advance, because I didn't want you to steal the one line that I wanted to say to those people. And that is this. All of you who Mary thanked, you have answered your country's call, and yours is a grateful nation. Believe it or not, for reasons that I'll explain in a moment, I don't remember ever coming to Cleveland, Ohio before now. And so, being of the old school that I am, I brought my credentials to present to you. And those credentials are these. From the age of 8 to the age of 16, growing up in Tyler, Texas, I actually subscribed to the Cleveland Plain Dealer. But there's more. To this day, at age 72, I have in my possession, under lock and key, countless football programs autographed by the stars of the Cleveland Browns during the 1960s. Lest you doubt, I have the autographs of the great Jim Brown, his successor, Leroy Kelly, Frank Ryan, Gary Collins, and on and on and on, under lock and key. For some reason, when I was growing up, the Cleveland Browns were my team, and I followed every second of the Cleveland Browns and every one of their star players. And they are still my team to this day. On July 4th, 1776, the American colonists declared their independence from King George III and the British Crown. 250 years ago, almost to the day, bringing forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Thus it is that in less than 2 weeks, on July 4th, 2026, we will celebrate the birth of the greatest nation on earth, the greatest experiment in self-government in the history of the world. In 1787, after the Revolutionary War, to secure our independence from the tyrannical King George III, we, the people of the United States, ordained and established the Constitution of the United States in order to form a more perfect union. The Constitution was ratified and adopted by the states and became the great charter for our self-government and the guarantor of our cherished rights and liberties on June 21st, 1788. For the 250 years since its founding, America has been the envy of the world and the beacon of freedom and liberty because of the shining light of its democracy, constitution, and rule by law, not by men. But as we all know, today America is not the same beacon of freedom or the same envy of the world that it has been for a quarter of a millennium. Today, 250 years later, we are again engaged in a great battle, testing whether this nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. Prophetically, these times in which we live on the 250th anniversary of this nation's founding are, once again, the times that try men's souls. As we celebrate our founding today, the question for we the people of America is whether we are willing to do the sacred work necessary to return our country to its deserved place as the beacon of freedom and envy of the world. Whether we are willing to do the hard but sacred work necessary to ensure that America will long endure. As we struggle to decide what we ourselves want for America and what we want our America to be and not to be, the entire world is anxiously awaiting our answer. More anxiously awaiting our answer today than it awaited our answer a quarter of a millennium ago. 250 years into the greatest experiment in self-government in all of human civilization, the time of America's testing has finally come. The founders of this great nation feared these times in America. In this 250th anniversary year, America's institutions of government and governance and its institutions of democracy and of law are under vicious, unsustainable, and unendurable attack from within. At this point, 5.5 years since January 6, 2021, the 47th President of the United States has all but wrought the complete inversion of our nation's positive law, the Constitution and laws of the United States, and our moral law that has been passed down to us through the ages, and even our biblical law as found in both the Old and New Testaments of the Bible, including the Ten Commandments. But where, say some, is the King of America? I'll tell you, friend, he reigns above and doth not make havoc of mankind like the royal brute of Great Britain. Let a crown be placed thereon, by which the world may know that so far as we approve of monarchy, that in America, the law is king. For as in absolute governments, the king is law, so in free countries, the law ought to be king, and there ought to be no other. But lest any ill use should afterwards arise, let the crown at the conclusion of the ceremony be demolished and scattered among the people whose right it is. Thomas Paine, Common Sense, 1776. Speaking in a time of similar moral and legal upheaval in America nearly 2 centuries ago, a 29-year-old state legislator who would later become the 16th President of the United States, urged a revival to the Constitution and the rule of law, a renewed reverence for that great charter for our governance and guarantor of our liberty and freedoms. Let reverence for the laws, the young Abraham Lincoln implored, be breathed by every American mother to the lisping babe that prattles on her lap. Let it be taught in schools, in seminaries, and in colleges. Let it be written in primers, spelling books, and in almanacs. Let it be preached from the pulpit, proclaimed in legislative halls, and enforced in the courts of justice. In short, Lincoln sermonized with the reverence he urged, let the Constitution and the rule of law become the political religion of the nation. Today, America is in desperate need of such a revival to our Constitution and rule of law as our 16th president urged upon the nation in 1838. A reawakening and quickening to the reverential imperatives of the Constitution from which we have strayed so very, very far. Winston Churchill said that courage is rightly esteemed the first of human qualities because courage is the quality which guarantees all others. We Americans must summon the courage that has eluded us in our all-consuming fear over the past decade of years. We must summon from deep within the courage that was once our founders' courage, when, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, they mutually pledged to each other their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to secure their and our liberty and freedom. With the united support of a hopeful world, we Americans must overcome our fear. We must find our voices again. We must finally rise to our feet, raise our voices, and speak out against what we are witnessing in America today. After all, America is a nation founded upon dissent and protest. America's protest against the British Empire 250 years ago is the single greatest protest in all of history, a revolutionary protest and dissent from the tyranny and oppression of King George III. Until now, we Americans have never hesitated to support, defend, and protect our cherished liberties, our freedoms, and our fundamental constitutional rights from government tyranny, whether that tyranny come from abroad or from at home. Why are we hesitating now? Why are we silent now at the very time of America's testing on this, the 250th anniversary of America's birth? Why have we Americans chosen to remain silent? Or why have we allowed ourselves to be silenced and betray in this fateful year of all years? Why have we suddenly lost our voices? 2.5 millennia since we were gloriously given our voices by the Constitution of the United States of America. I will tell you, we've lost our voices because of fear. Fear of ridicule, fear of political reprisal, fear of political persecution, fear of personal persecution, even fear of prosecution. In far too many cases, fear for our lives and our livelihoods, fear of the unknown as to how this all ends and how. We can be forgiven for our fear, but we will never be forgiven for our cowardice in the face of our fear. The founders of this great country did not cower in their fear, and unlike us, they had reason to fear. When the men who founded the greatest nation on earth first came face to face with fear, they mutually pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. They stared down their fear and defeated fear itself. There is no excuse or defense for the cowardice that is inflicting America today, especially the cowardice that has consumed our political leaders. Nor is there forgiveness awaiting those who have cowered or been coward, least of all those who have been elected to represent us and our country. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. hauntingly warned that in the end, capital E, end, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. We should pray that we will not be remembered for our cowardice and our coward silence in these times when America needed us most. If we are to be victorious over the evil that is warring for the heart and soul of America today, it's going to take the courage of the armies of God and the moral clarity of the collective voices of we the people. It is we who ordained and established this Constitution in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Ours is the righteous war, not theirs. America is calling, and we must answer. If we answer and but find the courage to speak our powerful truth to our government's powerless untruth now, today, not tomorrow, as did the founders and our ancestors when their time of testing came. The United States of America will soon again be the envy of the world, and it will endure forever as the beacon of freedom and liberty to the world. Once we have finished the righteous and noble task at hand, we must then finish the great task that yet lies ahead of us 250 years since our founding. But the dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. As Abraham Lincoln exhorted the nation in 1862. So then must it be in this 250th anniversary year. We Americans must think anew and we must act anew. We must refound America again. We must reacquaint ourselves with the truths that we once believed were self-evident and still are. We must reawaken ourselves to the ideals, the beliefs, the principles, the values, and the truths upon which America was founded and has flourished for 2.5 centuries. And re-examine these foundational truths, beliefs, and principles if need be. We must build anew the hopes and the dreams upon which this country was founded, the hopes and dreams that have inspired us and bound us together into the more perfect union that we, the people, ordained and established, the hopes and dreams that have made America the greatest nation on earth. We must turn this government back into the channel in which the framers of the Constitution originally placed it, as Abraham Lincoln urged. We must shore up and reinforce the bulwark of our faltering democracy and rule of law, and refortify the institutions of our law and democracy. Preserving virtuous institutions is its own noble purpose. David French put so well. And as we refortify and re-strengthen our sacred institutions of law and democracy, we need to inspire among our citizenry a reverential revival to the Constitution and to the rule of law. Above all else, America is a government of laws and not of men. We are desperately in need of a revival that will renew and revitalize the flagging faith of the American people in our Constitution and rule of law, the organic laws of our ordered liberty. We have no other choice than to pass this test laid down for us by our ancestors to ensure that this nation, so conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, will long endure. And when this storm has passed, we must promise ourselves and the generations that follow that we will never again take our democracy and our Constitution for granted. We must learn from these tumultuous times and never to forget that our democracy and rule of law are fragile and can be wrested from us in an instant, even by those among us, if we are not vigilant. That same young man of mere 29 years who would become President of the United States foretold of just such a danger to the Republic from within almost 2 centuries ago. Listen to his prescient and ominous warning for us today. We toiled not in the acquirement or establishment of them. They are a legacy bequeathed us by a once hardy, brave, and patriotic, but now lamented and departed race of ancestors. Theirs was the task, and nobly did they perform it, to possess themselves and through themselves us of this goodly land, and to uprear upon its hills and its valleys a political edifice of liberty and equal rights. 'Tis ours only to transmit these to the latest generation, that fate shall permit the world to know. At what point shall we expect the approach of danger? Shall we expect some transatlantic military giant to step the ocean and crush us at a blow? Never. At what point then is the approach of danger to be expected? I answer, if it ever reach us, it must spring up amongst us. It cannot come from abroad. If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. As a nation of free men, we must live through all time or die by suicide. I hope I am over wary, but if I am not, there is even now something of an ill omen amongst us. I mean the increasing disregard for law which pervades the country, the growing disposition to substitute the wild and furious passions in lieu of the sober judgment of courts, and the worse than savage mobs for the executive ministers of justice. What then must we do if we are to bequeath this political edifice of liberty and equal rights to our descendants, this legacy that was bequeathed to us by our once hardy, brave, and patriotic race of ancestors? I will tell you, we must dedicate ourselves to the great task that yet remains before us 250 years later. 'Tis ours only to transmit this goodly land and this political edifice of liberty to the latest generation, that fate shall permit the world to know. We in the profession of law belong to one of the most honorable and honored, the most noble and nobilified, and the most venerable and venerated of professions. Of our founding fathers, 35 of the 55 delegates to the Constitutional Convention in 1787 were lawyers or had legal training. Of the framers of our Constitution, 32 of the 55 were lawyers. Of the Committee of Five tasked by the Continental Congress with writing the Declaration of Independence, 4 were lawyers. We in the legal profession are the guardians and stewards of the Constitution and the rule of law, the foundations of our democratic nation and the guarantors of our liberty. We lawyers take an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. We take an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We are uniquely qualified, positioned, and obligated to defend our Constitution and our rule of law and our democracy. And we must do so today, tomorrow, and the next day until the present existential threat is no longer. Thereafter, at long last, finally understanding their fragility, we must forever protect and preserve the Constitution and America's democracy as we are obligated by oath to do. If this all sounds as if the lawyer holds a special place in the constitutional order that is our democracy, and that we are weighted by an almost sacred responsibility, it is because we do, and we are. We have a high appointment, and we have a high charge. There comes a time in every single one of our lives, whether that life be private or public, when we are summoned to attest to our beliefs and convictions, when we are summoned to stand, bear witness, and affirm what we believe and what we do not believe. This moment of truth and decision is our moment of calling, and the decision that we must make in that moment always comes at personal cost. When our call comes, if we answer with the courage of our convictions, we are heroes. Whether we be heroes just to ourselves or to our families, our friends, our loved ones, our communities, or heroes to our country. We call those in public life and in public service heroes who, when summoned, stand, affirm, and act to protect and preserve all that we cherish and hold dear in America. We honor these men and women as heroes because when their time comes and they are summoned, they rise, they speak, and they act without having to decide whether to do so. For them, there is no decision to be made, for they made their decision long before. When their times comes, these heroes stare down fear, often profound fear, already knowing what they must do and what their sacrifice might be. We bear witness to and we affirm the heroism of these heroes in order that heroism will be forever encouraged in a world in which there are vanishingly few with the strength, the courage, and the will to speak and act when they are called upon. That is, in a world where there are fewer and fewer heroes. Members of the noble profession of law, our moment of calling has come. We here today are being summoned, as are all Americans, to stand, bear witness, and affirm that we believe in America, that we believe in our Constitution and in our rule of law, and that we believe in our democracy. You and we, as members of the venerated profession of law, are being summoned to stand, bear witness, and affirm again that we will honor the oath we took to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We must challenge and entreat each other today to commit and recommit ourselves to the Constitution and the rule of law, to pledge ourselves to these and to their protection and preservation. We must vow today that it will be the rule of law that triumphs over politics, and not politics that triumphs over the rule of law. If we succeed in this, our sacred obligation to our country, we will have risen to what is our high calling, to ensure that America long endures as a nation of laws, not of men. We will be heroes for the Constitution and the rule of law in America. I leave you this afternoon with this reminder of the inspiring prophetic words from Thomas Paine, writing in his revolutionary pamphlet Common Sense in 1776. But where, say some, is the King of America? I'll tell you, friend, he reigns above and doth not make havoc of mankind like the royal brute of Great Britain. Let a crown be placed thereon by which the world may know that so far as we approve of monarchy, that in America the law is king. Friends, our task is righteous and our task is noble. Our struggle is not only for today, but also for our vast future. Abraham Lincoln reminded us. And the hour is late. Godspeed, America.
Thank you, Judge, for those incredible words. We're all lucky to have been here for that speech. I appreciate it. So we're going to do several things at once now. Can I invite my friends Jen and Dan on up to the stage? But just like democracy, sometimes agendas are messy. And I realize that what is written down in front of you is not where we are at in the program. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to do our partner commercials, as we talked about from before, from our friends at the Ohio Democracy Project in just a second. From there, we're going to take a very quick break while the team resets the stage and go into our first panel. We'll do our second panel in here as well. The roundtables are not going to happen today, which is totally okay. We'll still give you the discussion questions for you to think about, and hopefully you can find somebody out in the community to discuss those with. with. We will actually finish ahead of schedule on that. We should be done around 4:30 and have the reception around then. So I appreciate all of you again being here. And with that, my friends, Jen and Dan from the Ohio Democracy Project.
Thanks so much, Chris. As Chris said, I am Jennifer Cohen. This is Dan Terrell. We are the co-founders and co-executive directors of the Ohio Democracy Project. And if you haven't heard of us, that's because we're still pretty new, and we were formed of this moment to address the complex and chaotic threats to democracy in this state. We bring to this work our different but complementary backgrounds. Like many of you, I am a lawyer by education, by training, and by most of my work experience. Dan has spent most of his work life overseas, working on international political transition and violence prevention. So you can imagine we have some interesting conversations. We are often asked why, as a group that's focused on these complex threats, why we focus on Ohio. And the reason is that because while we believe that the threats to democracy can come from any level, we believe that the solutions lie with the people individually, the people collectively, the people in relationship with one another across pillar, across sector, across partisan, racial, religious, and economic lines. And so as we work with many people across Ohio in the next months to prepare for this election and for future elections, we remember the importance of that collaboration and of bringing these different viewpoints together to develop novel solutions to sometimes novel problems. People often ask us, what should I do? People feel powerless. What should I do in this moment? I can see that things are going off the rails, but I don't know what to do. And our first answer is often a true but somewhat unhelpful one. Do something. Because I think we are all so used to watching the world go on around us. But as Judge Luttig said, we all have a role to play in this moment in protecting our democracy. So I will, in the remaining 30 seconds I have up here, because I know that we stand between you and the break, give you something that hopefully is a little bit more helpful than do something. So the first is that one of the things that we at the Ohio Democracy Project are thinking a lot about is the way that democratic backsliding impacts our business community, our economic and community vitality, and stability. And so we're looking to convene a conversation with folks connected to the business community. So if you are the manager of a firm, if you are a general counsel, or this is just an area that you're interested in discussing, please feel free to sign up at our table outside. The second piece is you'll see there's a QR code behind me, and you're gonna see this QR code a number of times. So I'm just gonna set the stage. A number of the groups here today, the community partners of this event, have been working together to figure out what is the best way that lawyers and law students can plug into the election protection work. If this is something you've been thinking about, if this is something your aunt has been telling you she wants to do, please connect with us through this form. You get all of us through one form. Very efficient. Anyway, thank you so much for having us. We're thrilled to be here. We're happy to chat further. We have a table out in the hallway. Thanks.
Thank you both. We are going to take a 7-minute break. We're going to start at 5 after 3. Please go grab one of those full sugar Cokes I promised you a couple of hours ago, and we will return with our first panel momentarily. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is feeling full from the amazing information that you're gaining today from the summit. So before I share just a little bit about Cleveland Votes and the work that we do, I have a little bit of a confession. Am I in a safe place?
Yes, of course.
Okay. I would like to share, my name is Erica Anthony, and I'm a recovering paralegal.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
I like to tell lawyers that. I was a paralegal for 8 years, so I like to make my little lawyer jokes because I got to hang out with y'all for quite some time. And people say, why didn't you go to law school? I said, well, every attorney I worked for told me not to go to law school. Start there. But secondly, I always say to people that the skills that I gained over the course of 8 years working in different legal spaces still very much stay with me. The analytical skills I gained, the organizational skills, I think just astuteness to listen actively and really hear what people are saying. And so while I did not necessarily pursue that path by going to law school, I very much will always cherish the time and the mentors I had during that period of my career and all that I had the opportunity to learn. So I feel at home being here even as a recovering paralegal. So Cleveland Votes, I have the honor of serving as the co-founder and the current executive director for the organization. The quick 30-second version of our history is that my co-founder and I, Crystal Bryant Ajiman, who is an attorney by trade, her and I saw a gap 10 plus years ago in our ecosystem here in Cleveland. And at the time, her and I were both working with individuals who were impacted by the criminal legal system, both directly in prisons as well as coming back here to Cuyahoga County. And we started to just hear in sort of like the rumor mill of our community, folks saying, well, you know, they can't vote when they come home. And we're like, that is actually not true. And we were hearing it both from community members as well as those that were directly impacted by the criminal legal system. And so at that time, her and I began to do some work to help educate folks so that they can understand that obviously the laws are different state to state, but here in Ohio, it was not in fact true that folks could not vote when they came home from prison. And so what started as a very niche specific population has grown over the course of 12 plus years to really engage anyone in the community that both has been historically and or presently disenfranchised by multiple systems. Unfortunately, we're holding multiple identities as we navigate through life, and we know that there are a lot of people, a lot of voters specifically that are not wanting to be adequately and equitably involved in our democracy. And so for us, it's not just about voting. We think that is obviously an incredible part of the civic engagement and how you are civically engaged, but elections only happen 2 or 3 times a year, depending on the election year. And so it's really important as a year-round organization that we're engaging folks in community throughout, various seasons and really helping them to see the various on-ramps that they can take advantage of that can increase their civic participation, increase their civic knowledge. And I think, in this room, what is particularly important for me to communicate is that we are living in an era of dis and misinformation, and being able to have more advocates helping to amplify the importance of truth is really important. And I think specifically whether you hold a JD and or you're here as a community advocate, this is a moment where we do actually need all hands on deck. There are multiple ways you can do that. Obviously, there's community partners here, like ourselves. We have a table outside. Just building on what our friends at the Ohio Democracy Project said, it's really about starting with what are you most passionate about? I tell folks that it's not easy to stay engaged in moments of right now when it feels like it's just a very tumultuous moment in our country. And so voting rights at large obviously needs a lot of hands on deck, but there are a lot of tentacles to voting rights, right? So whether we're talking about housing equity, whether we're talking about education equity, right? There's multiple ways that we can protect the vote and protect and make sure that this thing we call the ballot is in fact sacred. And so I just ask that folks really think about, what is the area of interest for you? What are the skill sets that you can bring to the table? It can feel intimidating, and I want to say that all hands on deck really means all hands on deck, right? And so if you want to bring the legal brain to our conversation, come on, we welcome you. But you might say, you know what? I do that during the day. I don't want to bring my legal brain. I'm really skilled at social media. Even better, come on, bring your social media skills, right? So it's not one size fits all. It's just really figuring out first and foremost, what are you most passionate about? What are the skill sets that you want to offer up? I will say, and I don't often speak on behalf, but I am going to speak on behalf of the pro-democracy ecosystem. None of us are fully staffed where we need to be. None of us have enough resources that we need, right? And so many of our comrades would welcome the opportunity to bring additional capacity. And again, as attorneys, I know that's not the entirety of the room, but as attorneys, we really truly value the expertise and the legal nuance that you can bring to a conversation. I don't need to tell y'all how jargony, ballot language, and things of that nature can be. And we know that we are operating with a very low literacy here in Cuyahoga County particularly. And so any way that you can lend your expertise, any way that you can bring added capacity to our election protection space is greatly, greatly appreciated and valued. So please come see us out at the table. Cleveland Votes, again, has a host of resources and offerings that we bring to the community, and we hope to see you at an upcoming event. And thank you to the Bar Association for hosting this mission-critical conversation today, and Chris Schmidt for the opportunity to talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. All right, moving right along. I am a big fan of self-introductions because then people can tell you what they want you to know about them instead of the big bio. So all the big bios are in your binder that you have when you came in the door, but Atiba, why don't you start? Tell us who you are and what you do.
There it is. Hi, my name is Atiba Ellis. I am a professor of law at Case Western Reserve University School of Law and the Associate Dean for Enrichment and Engagement at the law school. I am here today as a voting rights scholar. I've written quite a bit about structural barriers to the right to vote, election disinformation and misinformation, which I am glad to see has been a running theme today, as well as I've been turning my perspective on race and democracy as well.
I'm Mark Griffin. I am the law director for the city of Cleveland, and I'm here as a practitioner. From 2004 to 2012, I ran the voter protection efforts in Cuyahoga County, an assistant director for the Ohio Democratic Party, to make sure every vote could count. And one of the things that we did, and one of the things I want to talk about today, is it was critically important that we try to protect the vote for everyone. And that was somewhat enlightened self-interest, but our view was we couldn't just pick Democrats or Republicans, but our view, particularly in Cuyahoga County, was to make sure every single citizen had a franchise. And so I'm here a little bit to talk about those experiences as well as the legal aspects.
Awesome. Tony?
Hello, I'm Tony Perlatti. I'm the director of the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections. I've worked there since 2007, been director since 2019. Thought I've seen everything, and I've hardly seen anything in those years. I'm also a trustee for the Ohio Association of Election Officials, where we work with legislators to lobby for solid, good election laws. And also, I am one of the members of Ohio's Board of Voting Systems Examiners, where we view election equipment and make recommendations to the Secretary of State for certification of certain systems for use in Ohio.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So let's start with this. How are you respectively feeling about the state of democracy headed into the 2026 general elections? We'll say both here in Cuyahoga County and then across the country. So Atiba, can we start with you with just general health of the electorate headed into the fall?
So I think there's this is a tale of two perspectives, I think. In fact, a set of different two perspective dyads, as we've heard up to this point, right? One of the challenges that we face in terms of perspectives on the health of the democracy is the fact that there seems to be at least perspectives that argue that, you know, we are in the best of times of elections, right? The best administered, safe, reliable elections, everyone can participate. And yet there is talk of rampant voter fraud and you know, election administration that is heavily problematic and threats by the federal government of taking over elections in certain states. And there's this conflation of rhetoric and reality. I think on the level of reality, election administration is quite sound and professionally done across the country, right? Here in Cuyahoga County, here in Ohio, with fairness to the Secretary of State. But that's an interesting thing because he's also saying, among other secretaries of state and governors and looking to the federal branch, right, there is this narrative of elections are not safe somehow, right? Despite the data that would support things like mail-in voting, early access voting, the creation that has taken decades of strong election infrastructure. That infrastructure hasn't changed, and yet the barriers, depending on what state you're in, thinking big level, and then we can focus locally, because my colleagues are far more apt about that than me. But thinking big picture, right, there is the concern about, depending on what state you're in and depending on the extent that things like voter purges or the rigidity of voter identification laws, the implementation of proof of citizenship laws, and these sorts of things make it far more of a narrow needle to thread one's ability to vote. And that those concerns become kind of hyper rigid and hyper legalistic based on these myths of fraud and interference and the like. And of course, this is something I've written extensively about, how there is this cycle from the rhetoric to the hyper rigidity of voting, but then there's the counter conversation about election integrity. And I'm just going to go ahead and say, when you called me and said, come to an election integrity summit, I said, come to what?
Remember when I didn't name names earlier when people had questions? So this is one of 3 people who asked me.
I'm one of them. Yeah. Because election integrity, as the rhetoric of voter fraud and election denialism, et cetera, has made it out to be, seems to focus on security without talking about access. And then, of course, in fairness, the rhetoric of the kind of new Jim Crow side of this conversation is that we're throwing back to 100 years ago where people are being excluded. Almost, to listen to the rhetoric, it's almost as if it automatically happens. Now, my scholarly view on this is there's no proof, as we've been hearing all afternoon, of the voter suppression justifications, but the structural discrimination side of the story is real but complicated, right? And it's these kinds of things that are casting doubts on faith in elections, despite the fact that our election process is sound.
So, Mark, in context of how elections, I guess, felt 10 years ago versus how they feel now, what do you think the comparison is?
Why should I vote if they're going to steal the vote anyway? Why should I register to vote when it really doesn't matter and my vote can't make a difference? So one of the things that I feel a little bit differently here is that what we've talked about is how the facts don't really support the narrative, but the facts are being used to do 2 things. One is to change the system of voting to make it more difficult, but the other is to create fear and uncertainty and doubt. So even for those who could vote, they're going to be discouraged from doing that. So, in terms of how it's more difficult to vote today, there was a time certainly when it wasn't just mail-in voting, it was absentee voting. So if you go back to the 80s and early 90s, you couldn't vote absentee or by mail unless you were actually absent from the state or you were over 65. And that result was that absentee ballots were almost always skewing Republican because it was an older demographic, businessmen who were out of the state. But you never heard any complaints about, oh, the mail-in votes are being stolen. And yet in this most recent California election, that's what you're hearing. And so by trying to create barriers to mail-in voting, which voters have discovered that they love, there is a systemic problem and then there's a fear problem. I'm going to wrap up with a little bit of this story, which is some of this has been going on a long time and some of it is different. So in 1986, I was sitting in a ward club meeting on the west side of Cleveland, and a young Sherrod Brown, who was running for re-election as Secretary of State, got up to say to, probably a group of about 12 people in ward clubs, you won't believe it. There are actually people who don't want to encourage people to vote. That was 1986. So that theme has always occurred. But it's much worse now, and I think it is systemic as well. I will add one more piece. Justice O'Connor spoke about the way tyrants can use laws in order to entrench themselves and to keep their votes. So I'm a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, and there are some other graduates that you may have heard of as well. Donald J. Trump, Elon Musk, I don't know, maybe you've heard of them. But the motto from the University of Pennsylvania is laws without morals fail. And the point being that laws are not enough, that we need morals for people to reinforce those understandings. And so when we talk about what concerns me today, I'm concerned about the failure to have confidence in our system, the failure to have confidence that people can vote, and that's what concerns me.
Tony? Health of democracy today. I'm assuming Cuyahoga County you feel pretty good about, at least I hope so. But looking nationwide, how do we compare to everybody else?
I do think that Ohio, we have some good safeguards in place on like cybersecurity side. Secretary of State LaRose, that is one thing I think with his military background has focused on that over the last 8 years. When he first started that, I couldn't stand it because it was very difficult and challenging, and now so thankful that he did with that, because I think we do have good systems in that regard. But voting is one, I mean, the thing with voting is it's in a constant state of change. Something we've been doing forever is constantly changing. And I would say that in Ohio, it's changing. Across the country, it's changing. And one of the real difficulties that we have, and really it's since 2020, is that the confidence in what we do has diminished. And prior to that, I think across the country, people looked to election officials as experts. They believed in what we did. They had confidence in the vote. And we're doing a lot of things now that we did before then, things that people didn't care about then that we were always doing because it was always important. But now with misinformation and disinformation being at the levels that it is, it's made our job so difficult in what we do. And where you have people who shop for news, that really has hurt our industry because they shop for the story that they want to hear versus the neutral, nonpartisan, factual things. So we spent a lot of time now working on voter education, where we always had focused on this is how you register, this is how you participate, to this is how we do things behind the scenes, this is how we show things. We're transparent. We try to be uber transparent to try to get that faith back. And with states having control, while some people don't realize that the federal government can come out and make statements, but it doesn't mean that the states do that because it's state controlled. You hear of something going on in different states that can't even happen in our state at this point under current laws. Doesn't mean laws can't change, but you have to educate and defend to that. So even I have good friends who they say the only reason I believe that Cuyahoga County elections are good is because you're there. Otherwise, if it wasn't, they wouldn't have faith. But it's not because of me, it's because of our systems. And so we deal with a lot of that, more so than I think we ever did. But I will say election administrators, there's a lot of good people out there.
And I will say that mistrust is both sides, right? I think it's the we in the what we affectionately call the People's Republic of Cuyahoga County. I think we forget that there's a lot of Ohio out there that's not here. But I will tell you, growing up in the little farming community I grew up in, there's a lot of mistrust of the system because the big cities are rigging it. The same way that there's mistrust of the system because nobody cares about inner city black voters. And both of those are misstatements. Both of those are mischaracterizations of what's going on. But it's remarkable how people from both extremes of politics in Ohio feel like they're being left out of the system. Tony, I want to stay with you for just a second to talk about the award you just won for voter education.
So there's a federal department, the Election Assistance Commission, who focus on various things related to election administration. And so back with 2024, dealing with people having mistrust in systems, we started an election integrity system to which we have grown and continue to add to, where we are giving we are busting myths. We are giving the behind the scenes on how things really work. And we've been doing that and continue to grow with that. And in 2025, we just got this award beginning of this year, there's the Clearinghouse Awards. And so we won the Large Jurisdiction Election Communication and Transparency Award for this series and the efforts that we put forth to educate people on why they should have trust in our systems and why at least Cuyahoga County systems are good.
I think that's awesome. That's good. Well, good for you guys. So, Mark, let me come back to you. Can you talk a little bit about, since you were a party lawyer, talk about the balance between the party interest in an election and talk about the party, I guess, the more capital D democracy interest in protecting the system at large?
Yeah, well, I think the small d and the capital D, at least from a democratic perspective, is that we want everyone to vote because we think in the long run that will help us. So, we traditionally have voters who aren't regular voters, and so that's why we've tried to really ramp up voter registration. Obama won Ohio twice. And that wasn't that long ago, and in part because they reached out to register voters. So from a democratic perspective, we want to make it as easy as possible for every voter, every legitimate voter to cast a ballot. So I think that is an important piece of where we're going. I would also say this, which is it's not clear as some people at the national level and the state level are looking really to target things like vote by mail. It's not clear how this is going to play out in a partisan perspective. And I say that because one of the things that Donald Trump did was he flipped a lot of voters. A lot of the Democratic voters who used to be Democrats are now voting Republican. And some of the older voters as well still skew Republican. So there are some who argue, no, cracking down on vote by mail is really going to hurt the Republicans. I would say this as a Democrat, which is we want everyone to vote. And we shouldn't look at necessarily how it skews, but the idea of making sure the franchise is available to everybody.
And that's one of the things, thinking back to the 90s when I came of voting age. Somebody mentioned 1976 earlier as the bicentennial, and I thought that must have been fun, but I was -5 years old, so I missed that. But the thing I associate with democracy is Rock the Vote. That was on MTV in the 1990s, and the whole thing was about getting everybody to register and getting everyone to vote. And the thought of a basic cable news channel now putting out everyone should register and everybody should vote, it seems almost the antithesis of where we are, especially for cable news.
With respect to vote by mail, they done a study. Brookings Institute found that out of the hundreds of millions of votes cast since 2000, there were between 6 and 46 fraudulent vote by mail every year in the entire country. But vote by mail also makes life a lot easier for Tony because it smooths out the peaks. It makes election administration is really complicated. I think you guys do a fantastic job. I mean, and it's changed so much since 2004. Now our biggest questions are, hey, are there enough parking spaces outside of the polling places? So it does make a difference. Vote by mail makes a huge difference in terms of administration.
Right. Atiba, that was a perfect lead into the question I want to ask you. You assigned me some homework on our call last week, and you wrote a law review article called "The Meme of Voter Fraud" that I assigned to my staff, and I expect you all to have taken notes, and we can talk about it at the staff meeting tomorrow. But it's a fantastic look at this myth that we've heard a lot about today. Can you talk about the article and really the premise behind that?
Well, should I come tomorrow and?
Yes, we should. We're going to write essays, and all of you be aware that there's going to be homework. Yes.
So here's the 2-minute version of that, which is to simply say that I came to that article thinking that the problem is that a lot of the advocates for fair elections and democracy are rightfully bringing facts, but it's bringing facts to a rhetoric fight. Right. And the theme of the meme of voter fraud, it was to sound the idea that this is disinformation. This is propaganda, but it's propaganda that sticks because it's a story that fits a narrative that at least some part of the American public deeply believes in and deeply finds comforting and empowering. And notwithstanding whatever political view you might have, I think that we have seen the data say, and in fact, I was reading some stuff this morning talking about how the 25 or 30% that represent, by and large, the folks who support the current president deeply believe in this sort of narrative because it gives an explanation. And by meme of voter fraud, I mean a meme, like something like a cat picture on the internet, right? It's there, it makes you feel something, whether you love or hate cats. And my two cats will have words with you if you, tell me you hate cats. But the serious thing is, like, it's an idea that you can associate two disparate things, a cat picture and words, that elicits a reaction. But if you associate, the idea that certain places in the country poorly administer their elections, and your evidence about that is that jurisdiction happened to come up with a result that you didn't like, suddenly also is a meme that then justifies a belief and empowers you to make choices. And the larger story of that article is that those beliefs are often expressions of ideologies. And I talk about the ideology of exclusion in the franchise. And even though we tell a story about America that is one of the brilliance of its democracy, it took a lot of fits and starts to figure that out. And it took not just one founding, but it took, in essence, three foundings: the original in 1776, Reconstruction between 1865 and 1877, and then the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. Now, of course, the irony is I wrote that article over a decade ago, and given what has happened since, I've tried to keep up. But I mean, we sit now in an era where the work of the second refounding, in light of Louisiana v. Calais and what the court has held about the Voting Rights Act over the last decade or so, has sort of rewritten that, right? You can think of law as the way to protect us from our bad ideas, because those bad ideas create harm, but those laws are kind of receding, and maybe I need to go write another article.
I agree. I've become the worst kind of actually guy at cocktail parties in the last 6 months, because this is the 237th birthday of America as we think about it, right? It's that first 12 years, 13 years was a total failure, and that's when we came back together to do it again. So make sure to be the most annoying person at your parties this summer at the barbecues and just say, well, actually, we screwed it up at the beginning. But you're right; it's an ongoing concern, and I think we've been talking a little bit, Mark, about the how politics now and politics then and the way we talk about elections really isn't all that different. This, in some ways, it's not as bad as it used to be, but it's also way worse than it used to be because of the way we spread information. So,
yeah, absolutely. And I think the myth is a very good framing device for understanding it, because myths can do a couple things. One is they explain something, as the professor just mentioned, and they also can be scary. And I think that that's the other factor as we talk about, the myth of voter fraud. It is something that can be scary and can motivate people. And myths can go different ways. So in 2004, there was a suggestion that there would be Republicans coming into the inner city to intimidate our voters. And Council President George Forbes kind of scratched his head and said, "You got to be kidding. Nobody from the suburbs is going to intimidate any one of my voters in the inner city. That ain't happening." But there is a lot of fear that is associated with elections today. And so we would spend a lot of time, and actually Jeremy Paris is here, and he's sort of taken over for voter protection. So thank you. And over the years, we'd get a lot of reports of, there's someone here or someone there who is intimidating voters. Or, for example, we'd get a story that Republican lawyers were showing up at voting places on Election Day to intimidate the staff. And so I guess it was 2012. So the Obama reelection, we get reports that there are people in a Latino voting place in Cleveland, dressed in suits, intimidating voters that are coming in. And so I'm like, oh my God, we finally have them. I pick up the phone, I call Steve Dettelbach, who's the U.S. attorney, and said, "God damn it, Steve, what is going on with this?" He's like, "Okay, let me get back to you. I'm going to get right into this." 15 minutes later, he calls me back. He goes, Mark, those are our people from the DOJ who are trying to protect voter rights, Latino rights. So my point being that the fear can make us not see things correctly. And so that is a problem. It's a myth that drives a lot of conduct.
Tony, I want to ask you about something you said on our prep call the other day. You said election day is a bad business model. Can you talk a little bit about what you meant by that and maybe improvements we could see over the decades to come?
So first off, no matter how you cast your ballot, whether by mail, in person, or at the polls on election day, we count all the ballots that we're supposed to count. That being said, when it comes to control of processes, voting by mail and early in-person voting are the processes that my staff have most control over. And it's because I'm able to have a combination of permanent employees, long-term seasonals working on those processes. And we have access to the live voter registration database, and we're able to handle things in a different manner. The polls on election day, which is in Cuyahoga County, the majority of how people vote, but somewhere between probably 65 and 70% go to the polls, and it's a good way. And the poll workers are great people, but the business model is that we hire between 3,500 and 4,000 individuals who we don't know, who they're willing to do this. It's a combination of people who do it because they're very civic minded, which is great. Some of them are individuals because they need a paycheck. Okay, that's great, but hopefully you're also civic minded. And we put them in a classroom for anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, teach them all the things that they need to know. Because of that volume, we're training people between 60 days before an election and up to about 10, 15 days before, and we send them on their way. 271 poll places currently in the city of Cleveland. I can't have people there. So that is how we execute those election day duties. And I would say a high percentage is everything is fine. They come in, they show their ID, they get their ballot, and everything goes the way it's supposed to. But it's those smaller percentages, which when you have about 860,000 registered voters who are eligible to participate, it's those curveballs that we can't necessarily handle on election day if we don't know about them and people don't call in, and we have people making judgment calls. Again, they're doing the best that they can, but maybe sometimes they don't get it quite right. But we have to continue because you can't postpone and wait for another day to answer those questions. So that's that business model. And one of the things that, and then this is uniform across the state, all boards have more control over early in person and voting by mail, yet one of those forms, voting by mail, gets a lot of criticism. In Cuyahoga County this past May, 30% or more of all vote by mail ballots in the state came from Cuyahoga, and that happened last November. We do it very well. But what we don't see is early in-person voting. We always hear about, there's one location per county, which is correct, and you have it for a month. So what can people complain about? Well, I would be more for, in time, maybe you don't get 30 days. Maybe you have 2 weeks of it, but you're able to scale, and you can have more of them. You can geographically have them throughout the window, so it's easier participation. And again, boards have more control over those scenarios, and it becomes very convenient for voters. So there's this current trend of just trying to go more towards election day only because that's how we did it for always and forever. And yes, but things have evolved, and people's lives have evolved, and family structures have evolved, and all those things. And I don't quite think that that's always the correct approach to it. Having the variety of ways is good, but some of the one that's utilized the least, which is really in person, is probably one of the easiest ways for people if they don't have to wait in long lines and they don't have to travel far by having multiple early vote centers. But I don't know if I'll ever see that in my career.
So, Atiba, I don't want to get away from this conversation without letting you spend a few minutes talking about how the state of play really changed with the Calais decision last month, 2 months ago now. And can you talk about, I guess, where we are headed in terms of federal enforcement of that decision and the Voting Rights Act, broad scale?
Well, the very interesting thing about this is that the Calais decision, in a sense, represents the exact opposite, right? The federal government being forced out of the business of regulating or being an arbiter, I should say, about concerns raised under the Voting Rights Act. And to give you a little background, the Calais decision, I'm sure you've all heard about it. In short, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which is basically a restatement of the 15th Amendment's guarantee that there be no abridgment or denial of the right to vote on the basis of race, was limited in its scope, and is sort of the qualification that most people would say all but eviscerates Section 2. It is not unconstitutional, but it's constitutional standard for proving discrimination in the drawing of electoral districts in the United States is that you have to demonstrate intentional intent, right? You have to come up with a specific intention by lawmakers to discriminate on the basis of race. I did this because of yada, 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 certain minority group. Now, historically, the irony was that there was the decision in 1980 called City of Mobile versus Bolden, which interpreted the 15th Amendment itself to have that intentionality standard. But then Congress in 1982 revised Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act to implement what's called the effects test, right? We don't care what you were thinking. We don't care what your scienter, to borrow from criminal law, was. We care about the effect of the map, and that we can read that against history to understand whether that map discriminated against minority groups in the process, right? That did two very important things. One, it gave a cause of action, as reflected by the court's decision in Thornburg versus Jingles in 1986, where minorities who had been historically shut out from the process due to racial vote dilution, right, gerrymandering, because of a minority group that had enough people to vote to elect their representatives. They did so, they sought particular representatives, right? They were cohesive, and history shows that their rights have been diminished, right? That the Calais decision basically makes Jingles a dead letter. And the effect of that, of course, is one, this sort of race-conscious remedies approach gets thrown out. Two, that states with high concentration, particularly of African-American voters, promptly went and redistricted to disaffect those voters on the basis of partisanship, right? And especially in the Deep South, partisanship and race highly correlate. And so, which actually leads to the second big change, right? That the Voting Rights Act was the last federal law that directly interfered with gerrymandering of any sort. Given that correlation, you could stop partisan gerrymandering by demanding that there be adequate representation in the way districts are drawn. So the most immediate effects are those redistricting in Tennessee, Alabama, Louisiana, et cetera, as well as the mid-decade redistricting specifically spurred to do gamesmanship over the election in November, right? And I think the future would say that there is going to be more of that as we get to the next cycle of the census and the redrawing of districts, anticipating that the folks who want representation to reflect the present, or I should maybe say the past, get the leverage of gerrymandering to continue that while America continues to change into its future and become more diverse, not less.
All right. Well, we are unfortunately almost out of time, so I'm going to give you each about 60 seconds to wrap up. Say something that you wish we would have talked about today that we ran out of time to get to. But in the meantime, my friends from Common Cause, can you be ready to go as soon as I'm done up here? We'll call on you. So, Tony, we'll start with you.
I think the main thing that people need, there's a lot of talk about voter registration, and there's issues that recently arose and people going, and it is important that people continue to register. But I think more so than a registration issues is that Cuyahoga County in the state of Ohio has a turnout issue. And so we have lots of people who are not participating in the process, and we have 20, 30% of people making decisions for the whole, and that wouldn't fly for anything when you're trying to determine what toppings to get on a pizza or anything else, but we let it happen for when we vote. And so what we need to have happen in this election this November is get participation. Yes, we need to update registrations, get more people to register, but those ones that are there, we need to convince them how important it is to participate and cast that vote.
The votes that are cast are going to be counted, but they're trying to put into systemic ways to make it more difficult for some people to vote and to make it scary for people to vote. So we have to be talking about the truth and to get people to calmly move forward in registering, voting, and taking control of our own lives and our democracy again.
So in my graduate work, I wrote a thesis about poll taxes. And the heart of that story was the activists who campaigned against the poll tax in Virginia, specifically to the point of bringing it to a referendum and forcing the Virginia legislature to reconsider its position. The legislature ultimately used a scare tactic, if you will, to brush off that structure, but then they took it to the courts and ultimately won in a case called Harper versus Virginia Board of Elections. So that is to say, the power of all of us in the room as lawyers, as civic-minded citizens, that is there and can make a difference. History has shown us that we've seen these difficult times before, and the only solution to them is for each and all of us to meet the challenge, as the judge said.
Awesome. Please join me in thanking Tony, Mark, and Atiba. Now for a quick word for our friends from Common Cause. Go ahead.
I heard that quick. Got it. Hi, I'm Kelly Dufour. I'm with Common Cause, and our organization is actually targeting open and accountable government, and we have a focus on empowering people to participate in the political process. And so as part of that, we partner with All Voting is Local and the League of Women Voters, ACLU, and Ohio Voice to help the nonpartisan statewide election protection program. Since 2012, we have worked with the National Voter Hotline, the 866-R-VOTE hotline, where any voter at any time can call for help if they're having an issue with registering to vote, actually executing their vote, finding their polling location, or if they have a problem at the polls. And so what we do is we coordinate volunteers. Any volunteer who's interested in joining can register with us, and you can be a friendly face outside the poll. And so you can go and encourage voters on election day or during early vote. We also have boards of elections monitors that go to the meetings and appreciate the boards of elections. And so I just want to say a big shout out to the election officials, because I've been to so many of their meetings and watched them online also, and they do fantastic work. And so I think the only program I would promote on top of our election protection program would be being a poll worker. And so, for anybody that has questions or concerns about how your election is run, go see and learn and take the training and participate as a friend and a neighbor in your community so you can understand fully how hard our elections work for us. I'm also going to share my time with Maria Bruno, who is with Ohioans Against Extremism, to explain our way for legal support to be involved. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. As she said, my name is Maria Bruno. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Ohioans Against Extremism. We are a 501c4 organization that was launched in 2024 specifically to respond to extremism in Ohio. One thing we are taking on this year is we are going to be working with other nonpartisan entities to be organizing lawyers to do election protection. Of course, we have existing election protection. I've worked on it myself for over a decade in Ohio. This is meant to supplement that. So we will be working in conjunction with the existing election protection programs. We have no intention to reinvent the wheel here, but we will be supplementing that because we understand that this year we will be facing novel threats in a way that we have not had to deal with in previous years. So if you are interested in being a part of that, that could come in a myriad of ways, including but not limited to a small research project, to actually filing a motion, and anything and everything in between. So please fill out that form, and we will follow up with additional ways to get involved.
Awesome. Thank you both for being here. All right, we're going to do a really quick reset. We need to add a couple chairs up here to the stage. Let's come back at 4 o'clock. We'll start the last panel. Please stick around because the panelists have promised me this one will be spicy. So that's your incentive. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody, for being here today. My name is Steve David. I'm the Ohio Director of All Voting is Local. We're an organization that is dedicated to expanding ballot access and notably viewing our local election officials as an important constituency in the ability to preserve ballot access for our communities. So really appreciate everything we heard from this previous panel about the great work being done by our local boards of elections to keep the wheels on our democracy and keep things functioning, but also that visioning of the better ways that we could be designing how our elections work in the state to make sure that folks have access. So I'm gonna talk about 3 quick programs that All Voting runs, but the final thing I really want to do is do one more plug for this interest form here. So amongst the initiatives that All Voting is Local is engaged with as part of our role with the Ohio Voter Rights Coalition is that Board of Elections monitoring program that you heard Kelly talk about from Common Cause. We're trying to build those relationships with our BOEs from one month to the next. Ohio, unfortunately, amongst our awesome pro-democracy community, has a very active election denier network. And so our boards of elections monitors have been helpful at surfacing some of the mass challenges that folks were bringing to our boards in previous years and making sure that voters aren't being thrown off the rolls unnecessarily. The other program that we're excited about continuing this year is our Election Protections Peacekeeper program. If you are the chillest person in your lawyer crew, we need you to be a peacekeeper. This is a program that was designed for clergy, health and human service workers in order to be a calming presence at early vote and in our polling locations. And those folks are a critical piece of infrastructure to supporting voters and creating a pro-voter ecosystem here in our state. And then finally, at All Voting, we run an election administration pipeline program, which is for students and new professionals to meet their local boards of elections and to get that hands-on experience in how elections are run on our county level and to see themselves as someone who may take up one of these careers. So this is a great way for our young people to inoculate their communities with that knowledge about what's actually happening. I think we heard up here earlier the way that knowing someone who is inside the election system can really increase the confidence of those around them. So our elections administration pipeline program is a great way. If you know any young people in your lives, please send them my way who might want to learn more about how our democracy functions. But the final thing that I'll say is I'm deeply grateful to be amongst the organizations that are working here today to promote this interest forum we have in coordinating legal professionals and be part of this strong pro-democracy community that we have here. So the folks at the Ohio Democracy Project, Ohioans Against Extremism, Common Cause, and Cleveland Votes, if you don't have a home yet in the pro-democracy movement, we really encourage you to fill out this form and find a way to get connected with these folks. There's so much incredible work happening here in our state. I want to be grateful to have you be part of it. Thanks so much to the Bar Association for having us, and excited for this next panel.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. I'm excited for this next panel too. I was just telling Steve that this is the one that I built first and then built the rest of the agenda around this. So I'm excited for us to get to this point in the day. So with that, brief self-intros. Tell us who you are and what you do.
I am Stephanie Chekalinsky. I'm the executive editor of Crane's Cleveland Business.
And I'm Rachel DeSalle. I'm the managing editor at Signal Cleveland.
Hi, I'm Andy Geronimo. I'm the director of the Dr. Frank Stanton First Amendment Clinic at Case Western Reserve University School of Law.
And I'm Robert Shenton, and I'm here representing the Ohio Debate Commission as its executive director.
Awesome, thank you. That was the briefest of the day. Good job, guys.
I'm not an attorney.
Andy, we will start with you. So what does the First Amendment have to do with elections? What do elections have to do with the First Amendment?
Well, in some ways, they have everything to do with each other, right? So the First Amendment of the Constitution protects our speech and especially our political speech. So it has a special role to play in our democracy. I was glad to hear Justice O'Connor talk about Justice Brennan. Justice Brennan has an opinion in a case called Richmond Newspapers versus Virginia that talks about the right to gather information and the right to an informed democracy, and that the First Amendment is both a means and an ends to that. So it's not not just the right to speak, but the obligation for the government to provide information so that people can make an informed decision and really get to the heart of these matters. I should also say that it presents certain challenges to some of the things that we've talked about in these prior panels. One thing that I would even highlight is, Ohio for a time had a political misinformation law where in the Ohio Revised Code, they banned certain statements that you could go to a commission and to determine whether the statements made in certain political advertisements were true or not. And the Sixth Circuit struck it down on First Amendment ground, saying that, we don't leave that fact-finding to government bureaucrats. Sort of one of the reasons we outsource that fact-finding mission in a jury trial to juries is, that's the people that we want fact-finding. So the First Amendment has a lot to do with elections.
And thank you, Andy and Chris, for putting together a great panel today. Just as my disclaimer, I am not an attorney, and I recognize we're presenting to a room full of attorneys. So I wanted to look up a quick definition that I thought would capture it more in, we'll say, non-attorney language or English. And what I found was that the First Amendment ensures competition between political candidates through open discussion and free sharing of ideas, and not through government censorship. And I love that. I thought that was great.
Great.
I like that. Yeah. I will tell you, thinking back to being a 1L at Case Western, one of the things that being a bright-eyed kid coming in and thinking about law and truth and justice that really shocked me was, hey, if you're not under oath, you can lie to anybody. And that's something that I don't know that I put together, and nowhere more is that more true than politics. And so, Robert, I'll come back to you real quick on that. Can you talk about the clean election law in Arizona, I think it was?
Yeah, so Arizona passed a law back in the late 90s called the Clean Elections Law, and it established a Clean Elections Commission that was designed to help better educate voters and to reform some of their campaign finance laws. And what it's done is really mandated that candidates running for state or federal office are required to debate or at least provide their positions for the education of the voters. And we've had some talks here through the Ohio Debate Commission about could we pursue something like that in the state of Ohio, because right now we're having trouble getting candidates willing to debate. And we've not really had any statewide or federal election candidates debate now in over 2 years.
All right, to our friends from the media. So let's come to you now that we know what the First Amendment is in lawyer terms and in real people terms. Let's talk about the First Amendment in the media. How does it feel headed into the fall? What's the health of the First Amendment as it relates to your publications, but maybe even more generally?
I would say that I'm relatively optimistic. The First Amendment is one of those amendments that doesn't have a lot of bumper stickers, but everybody really likes to practice it. And so we have a lot of examples, and we talk a lot about infringements on the press and limitations on the press. And I don't want to sugarcoat things. There are 335 journalists imprisoned as of end of May, according to the New York Times. And, there's been significant crackdowns on press freedom that everyone is talking about. But this is one of those fundamental rights that people are very dedicated to. And so I think that it would be very difficult to get people to stop practicing their First Amendment rights. So I'm optimistic.
Yeah, I feel like we're talking about things on this big philosophical level, and I just tend to get down to the more practical level. Do we have a First Amendment? Yes. Are journalists still out there gathering information? Yes. But what I've seen is that really in practice, the gathering of information and the way that it needs to be gathered to get to the people who need it, it's really in the weeds of that where things have gotten a little sticky. And I remember we had a call, we were kind of chatting about this panel, and I'm like, yeah, I'm the person that's going to say, when I started in a newsroom, there were hundreds of people there, all out there in Cleveland, in Cuyahoga County, and even other counties, gathering information all the time. And around the time of elections, that machine revved up. We were out there talking to candidates, interviewing candidates, sending questionnaires, bringing that information back to people, putting together election guides. Now it's much more difficult. We don't have that. The newsroom that I work in now has fewer than 20 people. That does not mean that people who live here don't want that information. And what I see is that we have rights. And of course, we have folks like Andy who will help us battle when we need those rights defended. But what we don't have is the actual resources and support to get people the information they want and they need, and they tell us that they want and they need. So then it kind of turns into this narrative of people are apathetic and they're not engaged. And the more and more we talk to people, what I'm hearing is, this is what we want. You just aren't able to give it to us. Sometimes that's because the information isn't out there. It doesn't exist. Please ask a question about sentencing data later. And other times it's because literally it's so much information and so many candidates. So we've tried to come up with some inventive ways to get at this, but the real challenge is kind of in that weedy, how do we actually do what people need?
Well, and I'll speak from the Bar Association's perspective here. The political parties aren't necessarily helping either. We have our great program called Judge for Yourself that many of you in the room have helped volunteer for. We have one of the political parties that has had candidates stop participating because the political party has basically given them the out of, well, we should be the only ones spreading information about our candidates. Nobody else, you shouldn't be accountable to anybody else. And that's not just us, that's to the press, that's to the voters. It's they get our voting card in the mail and they should vote for the people that are on our color of the ballot. And that's really horrifying. I mean, as an American, as somebody who's out for truth, is that the political parties are actively trying to suppress information about their own candidates.
So, quick commercial for the City Club of Cleveland program on August 26th. The founder of the Ohio Debate Commission, Dan Moulthrop, who many of you know through the City Club of Cleveland, he had of course, a big staunch supporter of free speech and certainly the democratic process. The head of the Ohio Republican Party and Democratic Party will both be on stage together talking at the same time, and we're looking forward to being able to ask some questions and talk about things such as information and suppression.
That's awesome.
I mean, you said it was okay to be a little spicy, so I'm going to push
Go for
back
it.
a little bit. And so, you mentioned Judge for Yourself, and one of the things that I've really learned is that there is candidates putting information out there, but also sometimes lawyers are like, here's what we want you to know about people who are running for legal positions. And that's actually not the information people want. Along with Cleveland Votes, we surveyed a ton of people, and the information they wanted on people running for judge was concrete information on decisions they had made, their positions, on bail, on sentencing, and it was not information we could provide because there had been efforts made to make sure it wasn't providable. And I really didn't see a whole lot of lawyers standing up and being like, let's liberate this information. I got a lot of kind of pushback of like, well, this information's complicated and we don't know if people will know how to understand it. And my pushback was like, well, let's help them then. Like, let's not keep information locked away because we don't think people will be able to understand it. Yeah. And so, we tried to kind of stand up a judge guide with the Marshall Project. Incredible amount of effort, but one thing, and maybe this is something you guys might adopt, I don't know, we found useful with it was that when we went to people and sat with people and surveyed people and said, what question would you want to ask a candidate? And we really drilled down into the issues. We got some really decent questions that were nowhere on a scorecard anywhere else. And when we put those back out to people, we got hundreds of thousands of people using this judge guide. The problem then on the back end was like, well, who wants to pay for that? And that's the kind of issue that kind of comes up is a lot of people want something. Not a ton of people are standing up and kind of demanding that the information be available. And then they don't really want to support something that they can't kind of control on the back end.
Let's talk after. Judge for Yourself, lots of reforms that came this year. When I came in 2 years ago, it had a lot of promise and a lot of history that came into it, but it really was to the point of either fix it or kill it. Is where we were, and we decided to take a wholesale swing at fixing it. And so a whole new set of parameters, a whole new set of rules, a whole new set of a lot of new individuals that are involved in that, and more open and transparency with the public and with the media on how that happens. So, all right, Andy, I'll come back to you. We talk about the First Amendment and media and the press. Who is the press?
That's a great question, and it's open for debate right now. Certainly we have esteemed journalists
They count, right,
who definitely count. But there's an open debate right now about whether the press, and as we turn to sort of original understandings of constitutional principles, is whether the press protects sort of an industry, somebody who does this, who's trained in it and who knows what they're doing, and in some ways gets paid to do what they do, or on the other hand, does it, scholar Eugene Bollock has posited that the press really protects technology itself. So the idea that you were there to disseminate information. I'll also plug, there was a decision out of the Ohio Supreme Court, I think it was last year, where a citizen was told that they could not record a court proceeding, even though the court's rules authorized it, and the trial court judge said, well, you're not real press. You're just a dude with a camera. And I believe it was Justice Kennedy gave sort of an homage to the new press these days. The press is bloggers and journalists, and people who are there to disseminate information and are there to help the public in understanding what's happening there. So I would say it's open for debate, but I would also say, and this may be a transition to something else we would talk about, as far as the Supreme Court's concerned, the press clause gets you no additional rights above and beyond typical First Amendment speakers, and that principle comes from Citizens United.
So let me ask our reporters over here, where would you draw that line? Who's in your camp now and who's outside of it, or is it just everybody?
I mean, my camp is pretty broad. There are not very many journalists practicing anymore. Information is good information is in short supply. There's a high demand for it. So if you're asking my personal opinion, if you're collecting and disseminating information, you're press. Now, then we have to talk about all the responsibilities that come with being a member of the press, and there are significant responsibilities. And that is a separate conversation. But as far as I'm concerned, the camp is large.
My son runs the Instagram account for his robotics team. He now believes he is the press and has many rights, of which I will not grant him.
Tell him to call me.
But I would say that, I do think that this is, an area worth talking more about. I think there's this kind of legal view of it, who gets certain rights and who doesn't. But in my view, I think we can talk more about opening up who gets to help gather information and what role they can play. I feel like sometimes we put these real strict rules on people, and it kind of either scares them away or actually doesn't help them figure out their responsibilities. In 2020, when we launched our Cleveland Documenters program, the reason for doing that was that we knew that there were not enough traditional journalists, and there was not enough training for people to kind of really report on what was going on in the community. So we started to hire and train and pay people to go into public meetings and take notes. And we taught them a bit about kind of those rules and responsibilities, but we didn't say to them, you're now journalists and here's all the things that you have to do. What we said was that many people can help gather information and share it. And so we help do the editing and stuff like that. But we don't say to them, you're the press. We give them a badge that say you're a documenter. And if someone asks you what you're doing, you're here as a resident, you're listening on a public meeting, you're going to make notes, we're going to share them with people. So I do think it's important to have that. Again, I'm just going to be a super practical person today. We're here talking about rules and laws and who is what. But for the average person, they're just I want to participate in this. And sometimes I think we make it really difficult. The other thing that we did was we did a public records text course where we sent people text messages for 7 days and taught them how to request a public record. Now, did we get into all the ways in which it's going to be real difficult to get these records? No, but we gave them a top level, view of it. And I think folks think there's not an interest in that only nerds like us care about it. More than 500 people signed up, and 98% of them completed the whole course. So I think we really just need to focus less on what are the rules for this, and more how do we open up opportunities for people to be part of this. And then along the way, you kind of learn and you teach kind of what these lanes are and what these rules are.
And I do think there's some sentiment out there from some people who are maybe inimical to the press that, the being a journalist or being part of the press encompasses some sacred obligation to be perfectly fair and neutral up the middle, which is not my vision of the press at all, which is, a very robust and diverse set of voices, that could cover one thing a certain way and maybe the same story from a completely opposite perspective. And for that reason, I think, people like the documenters and other folks in sort of quote unquote non-traditional media, it's always been a First Amendment principle that more speech is better than less speech. And we've also, there's also lots of talk about getting more engaged civic participation. And I think putting those two together, I think would make it a mistake to try and draw quote unquote the press who get press protections more narrowly than we
So, more than a lawyer, I'm a history nerd, as you probably could tell from my remarks earlier. And I always love to compare and contrast where we are versus where we've been. And I think there's this idealistic, if it was only like it used to be, if it was only Walter Cronkite on the 6 o'clock news, we would never have any of these problems that we were having. But Robert, when we did our prep call, you talked a little bit about the difference in the 1770s and now around public discourse and debate and how things are reported really isn't that different, right?
Sure. And how many of you have had a song that you listen, you love the music, you love the beat, then you listen to the lyrics and go, oh, okay, maybe it's not quite something. So, hey, Hamilton, how many of you saw the musical Hamilton, right? You love it? Okay, maybe not. Well, that was about a duel that happened between two candidates that took homage or against each other, that decided to go out and shoot each other in a duel. And so we aren't that different in terms of how we're exchanging, we'll say, things that are substantiated or unsubstantiated, but hopefully we've elevated beyond the duel and let's go shoot each other. But I'd like to say there's maybe another piece to this topic, and that's intellectual civility. And while that's maybe big terms here, I think it's basically a basic respect for our ideas, education about those ideas, and a basic respect for each other as humans. And if we can get back to that through means of debates and such, not devolving into a duel, I think we'd be better served by that.
That's right. And so keeping that historical lens on for Andy and Rachel and Stephanie, thinking about editorial control at some point was kind of the mandate from the top, and then editorial control became about quality, and then editorial control maybe took a back seat, and now editorial is back in a big way, but it's pushing a narrative. I think your publications are not in the same situation as a lot of the national publications we see, especially on cable news. But you talk about kind of that evolution and how editors play a role in the process, maybe in a different way than they used to when we think about the golden days of American news media.
I'm not old enough to have worked in that era. By the time I became a journalist, a lot of those people were still working in the newsrooms. I worked at the Columbus Dispatch, but we were in the throes of the layoffs and the buyouts that came after the housing crisis around 2008. So by the time, I was coming up and learning about editorial control and the standards and the expectations, a lot of the edifice had been stripped away and eroded. Journalism historically, that balanced idea that objective news matters, that wasn't always the way it was. I mean, obviously we had a period of yellow journalism in the history. The colonial period was not dedicated to those. Ugly. Yeah, not dedicated to those principles. Those principles are hugely valuable, but they are, they're always aspirational because journalists are human beings. And so, the idea, though, that we would have repeated conversations about them, I don't think the public understands that those conversations are happening daily, and that we rely, if you're in a well-run newsroom, you rely on other journalists, but also members of the public to keep you straight and to keep you honest. And so when the public is interacting with the media, they assume this bias because it's part of the narrative that has grown up around the media, but they don't understand that what they're providing is a service, and that a good journalist wants you to call them and tell you they got it wrong. They really love it when you call them and tell them they got it right. But we also want you to call us and say, hey, you missed. So I don't know that people understand that.
Yeah, I mean, Journalism has never been objective. I mean, you're making choices every day. What you cover and what you don't cover is a decision that you make. The hope is that you're making those decisions based on what your community wants and needs. And that is going to vary by community. What I think is important and that I try to focus more on with our newsroom is transparency. If we are making a choice, we should try to tell people why we're making that choice so that they understand, and then really trust them to say, okay, this is, this is my thought on whether I can trust this or not. I also think that, when we're talking about like objectivity, we're talking about these big stories that we do. But what I find people are really desperate for is something that we can provide, which is really basic information on how things work. I mean, I'm also like Stephanie, wasn't in newsrooms in that golden era, but I have found that even since I started doing this 25 years ago, the amount of basic information for people to understand how a process works has really degraded. And so then when people jump in and they're having these suspicions about whether something's accurate or not or biased or not, it's actually not because they only don't trust news. It's because they don't have the kind of foundational information that they need to kind of understand how a system works. And so I think we have a responsibility to kind of go back to this part. And I always talk to folks in the newsroom. I'm like, hey, sorry, this is not the sexy stuff. Explaining to people how the board of control works is not why you got into this, but it's absolutely necessary, because otherwise someone's going to kind of jump to a conclusion about why a decision was made or how a decision was made and spend a lot of time on wondering whether it was fair or not, because they don't actually have the information they need to determine that. So we have to do more of the, unfortunately, civic veggie stuff that doesn't seem so fun, so that when we get to these more important and dicier topics, people have the information they need to understand what's in the story. Is it fair? Is it biased? They can make those determinations if they have this other information.
I was thinking about editorial discretion when Robert was talking about this statute in Arizona, and the idea that the First Amendment protects, say, a newspaper editor's decision to run or not run a candidate's position or comment on something. There's a case called Miami Herald versus Tornillo, where there was I think it was Florida, had a right to reply statute. So if the newspaper published something from candidate A, they were obligated to publish also from candidate B. There are similar rules for broadcast media, but this was specific to newspapers, and the Supreme Court said, no, the government has no business telling you what you must publish as a newspaper, and I think it's really important, like I was talking about in terms of diverse media sources, to protect that. It might be a moral good or a journalistic good to want to present that in a balanced way, but the First Amendment would say that we shouldn't, that the government cannot require that as a matter of law.
And maybe this is too lofty of a goal, but in the 237th anniversary of the country, Chris, can we focus on us? The idea of the information that's generated for us, the people, as opposed to information that's generated for me, the candidate, or me, the person in that. So I'd love to see a bit more of that understanding of things that we're doing for coverage that relate to us and that importance in electing our officials.
All right, Andy, I've put it off long enough. Let's talk about Citizens United and money in media and money in coverage around elections.
Let's talk about it. We talked about this a bit on our prep call, and what I said on our prep call is I would probably present if asked, I would present my perhaps controversial position that I believe is a First Amendment matter that Citizens United was correctly decided.
This is the spicy part, I promise.
I just think of it as this was Citizens United dealt with a film about Hillary Clinton. It was basically a hit piece on her. And the Citizens United case challenged the campaign finance laws that said that corporations or unions couldn't provide independent political expenditures, and the Supreme Court struck it down on First Amendment grounds. It usually gets controversial where people say that one corporation shouldn't have First Amendment rights, and that's something that I would challenge. One, because corporations have won a lot of our most closely held First Amendment rights. As a media lawyer, we look to New York Times versus Sullivan. It's no secret the New York Times is a corporation and sort of embedded those sacred First Amendment rights in the case law. Citizens United also upheld some transparency requirements about what money was in politics there, and I think that's a good thing. But the blowback from Citizens United, I think, are mostly on secondary effects of it. And what I usually hear is that corporations are too powerful, they have too much influence in elections, and if you're equating money with speech, then the people with the most money have an outsized voice. And I think that's a fair criticism, but I think that's an economic problem looking for an economic solution. And what our Constitution, I think, would say is that speech restriction should be a last resort in that. So I'm not cheering the decision of Citizens United or its effects. I think it's been harmful in a lot of ways. But I think the other thing that I think about Justice O'Connor's comments is that I think Congress could do something about this to level that playing field if that's what they're trying to do, not on the basis of speech, but on the basis of other things.
Let's talk about fake news for a few minutes. Everybody's favorite topic, and that we talked on our prep call about fake news is gone from being something that is truly false to being something that is said that I don't like. And that's true for a lot of listeners as well as a lot of politicians that are working at it. So, Robert, what responsibility does, as the convener of debates in Ohio, let's assume we get both governor candidates on the stage this fall, what responsibility does the commission have to correct fake news that gets put up on the debate stage?
So let's first start with what the concept of true debates are, which is two candidates on the stage at the same time with the opportunity to answer, an opportunity for rebuttal, back and forth. They're not pre-prepared remarks. They're not a forum. They're technically not a town hall either. And so really the idea for why we want to return to getting debates is that in the state of Ohio, we're going to have a new governor. We are going to have a new attorney general, a new secretary of state, treasurer, auditor. Perhaps we'll have a new U.S. senator that helps decide the balance of power in the Senate. And until you can see candidates on the stage at the same time and how they respond to questions, how they rebut, how do you really know how they're going to be in the room with a negotiation and such? And so I'm not sure as much as that do we have to have fact checkers live happening there, but in a debate, the debate audience, whether it's live or whether it's viewing or whether it's subsequent on a live stream, they get the opportunity to help decide and dig in further. And that's the importance of the journalism and covering those debates and deciding, again, what seems to be true or perhaps not.
So to our journalist friends, fake news.
I think actually the damaging part of fake news was that it has undermined the relationship between journalists and the public, and that it has made people afraid of us. I think that has handcuffed us in ways that limit the things that we can report, because we rely on the public to tell us things so that we can go out and figure out what's happening. And I think the destruction of journalists as a reputation has been very damaging to the press. But I would also say there's been a lot of talk about how disinformation is rampant, and what is it, a lie can make its way around the world before the truth even gets its shoes on. I think I disagree with that. I think that yes, people will share lies, but the value lies in the reflection of reality and in the wisdom that you can glean from someone who has collected information that is solid and transparent. And I think that while there is a lot of misinformation that goes around, like, you just can't beat reality, and it does exist. And so, get it from a trusted blogger, get it from a member of the media, get it from a debate, but get it. And I think that the pendulum is swinging back. I think people are exhausted by the nonsense.
Yeah, I think that the fake news thing is more of an issue at this kind of higher up, like, national level. I think at the local level, there still is a pretty solid amount of trust in local media. I think there's just less of it. I guess I can take Andy's tack and be like, let's not worry so much about, people shouting fake news and just invest in more real news. I'm going to be on team real news. And I think I see this every day in small ways. Like, like it or not, Cleveland still is kind of a Facebook town when it comes to social media. My younger reporters are highly annoyed at this. But I often see people on there, like something will happen and someone will post something, and then I'll see a debate unfold about whether this is real or fake or true or not. And when there is good information out there by local media, someone inevitably shares it. And when there's not, it kind of devolves into that kind of debate, and people start being like, this is fake information or whatever. So I think, we can talk about fake news, or we can kind of turn our attention to be like, how do we just produce more real, good, reliable information? Because that is what people actually want. They don't want to be debating about fake news, because I think a lot of people know that's just a distraction.
So Andy, taking fake news to the extreme, let's talk about Dominion real quick, and the response to the slap suit and everything that went into that from those accusations in 2020.
Sure. So when I was thinking of this topic, my mind immediately went to the Dominion voting system, Smartmatic defamation lawsuits that those companies brought against certain members, even members of the media, broadly construed, saying that these were false and defamatory statements about what those machines did. I think in a lot of ways, First Amendment lawyers are typically defending defamation cases and saying like, hey, the First Amendment allows us to criticize government processes and government officials and public officials in ways that might seem coarse or unwise, but the First Amendment allows us to do that. And I think the turn to these Dominion cases really is an example of defamation as an accountability tool. That wasn't trying to, change the results of anything, but it was a company who has legal rights, saying, you've really damaged our business by telling these harmful lies about us. One of the things that I think was so interesting about this case, and it's really interesting to look into those cases if you're into the First Amendment or defamation law at all, but the discovery in those cases that led to the judge in Delaware finding that they could prove actual malice, because behind the scenes, all these folks were saying, hey, these people are full of it. Why do we keep putting them on the air? It's usually a very hard thing to prove actual malice in a defamation case, and they had it there. So I sort of take it as, one, defamation can still exist as sort of an accountability tool if the case is a good one, and if it's not, those First Amendment protections are still there. But I do think it's a very interesting example of very, very high profile, high stakes litigation that bears directly upon elections and some of the statements made during elections.
We have one other issue here in the state of Ohio that's reached the level, in my opinion, of fake news in terms of whether you want to believe it or not, and I'll say data centers. So tomorrow, one of my colleagues at the Ohio Chamber of Commerce will be testifying in front of the Cleveland City Council on the economic impact of what a moratorium on data centers means. And so again, in my opinion, there's so much information on data centers, whether it's real or not real, and yet the economic impact is so big. It's not an election, but it's where news matters and facts matter as well.
Well, and you're starting to see and I will tell you, the farming towns where I grew up, the signs on the side of the road aren't just around elections anymore. Now they're around things like data centers and solar farms and protect our farmland and keep China out of my chicken coop and all sorts of things that have started popping up. It's really remarkable how people have used almost election-style propaganda promotion to affect these other issues that aren't really election issues.
Yeah, and the debate commission was prepared to step in on the property tax issue. If that was going to reach the ballot, there was significant education required on what that would mean to, quote, abolish property taxes. And so data centers may be another one where we need to really look at how we debate and make sure we get information out where issues might be just as important as elections of candidates.
We're almost done, but I want to hit two things really quick. Rachel, Justice Michael Donnelly will be up here in just a minute, and I'm sure sentencing data reform is going to be something he talks about. Can you talk a little bit about your involvement in that project and what we can do?
Yeah, I can't imagine that he would bring that up. I would just say that I got frustrated for a really long time. We tried to work on this, and it is just so you all know, when we surveyed residents about judicial elections, it was the #1 piece of missing information that people wanted. They wanted some kind of concrete information that was not on a flyer that came to them to just tell them about how someone had acted, and the fact that it was so difficult to try to come up with this basic information for me, just felt like we are keeping this information from people. And I do think that there is a larger story to be told about why and the powers that are kind of, enforced there about that. And there's people that are still working on it, but I think it's one example of where you can really disengage people. And when we did do the judge guide for a brief amount of time, when we had a small amount of funding, we actually tracked the number of people who were voting in those judicial races, and it did start to go up. So I do think that, if we were then able to give people the information they actually wanted and engage people around, judicial elections, that we could see quite a turn for it.
All right, Stephanie, and then we'll go for a last round for everybody. But let's talk about Afro Man, because this is the best story to come out of Ohio in many, many years. And so...
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why I'm optimistic about the public, the First Amendment, and other long-term prospects of retaining our free speech rights. I don't know how many people I know asked me who do not care that I am a journalist or what I do, suddenly wanted to know all about Afro Man. How do we get the body cam? How do we request this public record? And they watched his court case, and they were debating, whether or not he, in posting these videos about. Does everybody know what I'm talking about Afro Man? No. Okay. Afro Man puts out a rap in like 2000. It's his most famous song is "Because I Got High." Da 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 da. Okay. So then time passes, and Afro Man moves to Adams County, and he is investigated, and I don't remember exactly what for, but police search his house. They kick in his door. He's not home. His kids and his wife are home. He has security cams. They go through his house. He takes the video and starts making up new songs about this search, and he posts them all over the internet. They go crazy popular. Everybody, my 12-year-old's watching Afro Man videos. And there's a defamation lawsuit that is filed on behalf of the police officers, correct? Saying that he mocked them, he ruined their reputation, they were subject to harassment. And then it works its way through the courts, and the courts say, nope, Afro Man has the First Amendment right to, publish these videos and say what he wants. But it was like, I've never seen the public go so crazy for a defamation. You can buy like T-shirts about Afro Man's First Amendment rights. So let's talk about Afro Man. What do you got on for Afro Man?
We've talked about modifying my First Amendment seminar to be solely based on the Afro Man case, just because it's such rich material to work with. You have the defamation stuff, you have the court access stuff. People were really watching this trial in real time and reacting to the videos. Journalists were taking videos of it. It has criticism of law enforcement officers. It has satire. He made these songs that say things that you would expect rap songs to say about the police officers and their wives and things. And it got to, the jury said that nobody really believes that as a matter of fact. It's sort of the braggadocio built into rap music. So, it has so many different things, retaliation, and you could teach so many different aspects of the First Amendment using the Afro Man case. So I also am a fan and love it.
And you get to listen to music while you do it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's been super popular around our office, and so I would encourage you to check it out if you don't know what we're talking about. All right, final thoughts. We're to that point. So, Robert, can we start with you with something we should have talked about? Parting thoughts for everybody in the room.
I'm just going to go with this from the Ohio Debate Commission perspective. We want debates. We want candidates to debate. We're asking the public in the state of Ohio, where you have influence, where you have candidates that you're interested, ask them to debate. I'm cautiously optimistic that we are going to have debates for not only our highest offices, but also even at the local level when we're talking about mayor's races or potentially city council races, judge races. So we want debates should be a big theme and what we're looking to see from the Debate Commission in this cycle.
And I guess what I would say is the through line running through a lot of these topics for me in relation to the First Amendment is the First Amendment embodies the principle that it is a truth-finding mission, but it's not one capital T truth that one person knows and gets to say, right? It's a democracy is a messy project, as we've said, and it's this amalgamation of things getting together. I know the marketplace of ideas concept is much ballyhooed, but I still think of it sort of along those lines. Is that the more speech speech that we have and the more we're able to debate each other and challenge each other on principles and talk in good faith, the closer we are to getting to whatever this truth means. And we should embrace that, even if it means, allowing for some caustic or sometimes even false speech to come into these. It means that more people are participating, and we should encourage that rather than discourage that, in my view.
All right, please make sure that Andy's contract gets renewed at Case because we need him to defend us. So if anyone knows people, we need to keep Andy around. He saves
Get Afro Man to make a rap about Andy staying at Case, and we will have
he
it.
writes the best letters. Like we read them out loud in the office, we perform them. That's really great.
Thank you, Rachel.
But I would also just say that I feel like we're talking a lot about corporations, and I work for a nonprofit, and I just am talking a lot now about how news, especially in the local level, is really a public good. So I don't know where you all get your information. I'm guessing that some folks still get a newspaper delivered, but I think really just making a small investment in local news, whether it is just sharing it or even sharing some of your time to help us get information out there. I think that's the really important, most basic thing you can do aside from volunteering at the polls. So make an investment in the public good that is local news.
Well, I guess I would like to speak to the lawyers who are in the audience, and I'd like to say you should really get to know your press people. You should get to know the media. You should call us. I'm always baffled when we reach out to the media and, when the media reaches out to attorneys and we get silence or worse. You should just go to coffee. This is a relationship that is important for a lot of reasons, and there is really no reason to be afraid of the press. We're just the citizens.
Awesome. All right, can I have a round of applause for Stephanie, Robert, Andy, and Rachel? All right, we're going to go to the reception in just a second, but for a few closing thoughts, I'd like to have my friend and mentor, I can say at this point, and somebody I've gotten to spend a lot of time with in the last 2 years working on this work, Justice Michael Donnelly.
Thank you, Chris. Good afternoon, everyone. And believe it or not, I'm not going to say anything about sentencing reform. This was a great discussion, but it's tough, frankly, to talk about issues you're passionate about in criminal justice reform when you're worried about the entire tent coming down. And certainly the discussion that we just heard, the Fourth Estate's going to play a very important role in coming up to what I believe is the most important election of our lifetime. So as we conclude today's Election Integrity Summit, I want to offer my sincere thanks to all our speakers, panelists, moderators, sponsors, community partners, and everyone who joined us at this important conversation. I especially want to thank Judge Michael Luttig for his inspiring and powerful keynote address, one that I will not soon forget, and his unwavering commitment to the principles that sustain our constitutional democracy. I also want to recognize my friend and colleague, former Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor, whose leadership and dedication to judicial independence and the rule of law continues to inspire so many of us. We are grateful as well to the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association, which I'm a proud member, for their courage, the Task Force for the American Democracy, Ohioans for the Rule of Law. If you have not joined us, please visit our website, ohioansfortheruleoflaw.org, and sign our petition, and we'll have information about the current bus tour coming up to Cleveland on July 9th. Our host committee, our student ambassadors, and the many organizations presented here today. The breadth of participation we have seen is a reminder that safeguarding our democracy is not the responsibility of any one institution, profession, or political party. It belongs to all of us. Throughout this afternoon, we've heard a common theme. Confidence in our elections is essential to confidence in self-government itself. Free and fair elections are not self-executing. They depend on public trust. Trust that the rules will be followed, that every lawful vote will be counted, that disagreements will be resolved peacefully, and that the rule of law will prevail over partisan interest. In my lifetime, I cannot recall a moment when these foundational principles have faced greater challenges or when the need to defend them has felt more urgent. But today's gathering has certainly given me hope. When people of different backgrounds, perspectives, and experience come together in good faith to listen, to learn, and to once again recommit themselves to our shared democratic values, we strengthen the very institutions that sustain our republic. This summit is not the end of a conversation. It is the beginning of a renewed engagement and a renewed commitment to restoring confidence in our elections and preserving the rule of law for generations to come. Thank you for all of you for being part of this effort. Enjoy the reception tonight. Continue the conversation and safe travels home. Thank you very much.